stork chocolate review.
Oh, Cajun chicken.
Oh, good choice. Or how about something, say, barbecue North Carolina style?
You pick this time. Barbecue.
Something North Carolina style, which I have no idea what that might
All
be.
kinds of regional food being offered at the inaugural festivities. CNN's Eugenia Halsey offers a sampling for you.
It's back. Broccoli, that is. The vegetable George Bush loved to hate is taking center plate in Bill Clinton's Washington.
Yep, broccoli and Big Macs.
Masterminding the culinary comeback, former Clinton campaign strategist James Carville. Broccoli was the vegetable du jour at a Cajun party in Carville's honor. Of course, the Clinton crowd has a taste for anything Arkansan, so an inaugural brunch featured some of Chef Liza Ashley's recipes from the governor's mansion.
He likes that chicken enchilada, that buttermilk pie that I made, and pound cake. But he stopped eating all of that so he could lose his weight back.
Even high society caterer Ridgewell's has been poring over recipes from Arkansas, such as marinated beef.
There is a recipe which calls for a wishbone Italian dressing. I mean, we are doing Arkansas food, but we are adapting this type of food to the Washington crowd. That means that we will not be using as much fat as this recipe requires.
But an Arkansas-only affair, this is not. A two-day festival on the Mall featured everything from smoked seafood from Seattle to Grover's ribs from North Carolina, all for under $5. In short, Clinton's goal to combine uptown with down home, to show Americans that everyone has a place at his political table.
This is special because, you know, it really, you know, gets involved with the people, not just, you know, the big posh parties.
Oh, man, this is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
The hunger, yes, double it out, young lady.
A donation of canned food was the price of admission to an inaugural concert.
We want everyone to feel included, and we know that there are people that are hungry and that are homeless, and we want them to know that we are thinking of them.
Now, here's the scoop on Clinton's favorite ice cream, mango. He first tried it at the Menger Hotel in Texas and has been craving it ever since. The Hotel Washington plans to stock it regularly.
Hopefully when he goes jogging like he did this morning around the hotel, he's going to buy for ice cream.
Eugenia Halsey, CNN, Washington.
We have 2 Toyotas, and I was considering a Camry because of the reliability.
I was going to buy a Honda.
The day of inaugural activities gets underway. At midday, America gets a new president.
CNN, of course, plans non-stop inaugural coverage from 10 a.m. Eastern, just moments from now, until 7 tonight. And that includes the swearing-in of Vice President Al Gore at 11:45 a.m. Eastern.
And then at noon Eastern Time, William Jefferson Clinton takes the oath of office as the 42nd President of the United States. And then at 2:30 Eastern, the traditional inaugural parade from the Capitol to the White House.
I believe that if schedule is holding it all, the Clintons are now back at Blair House enjoying a little private time.
It'll be a full day for them.
Thanks for joining us on Morning News. I'm Bob Kane.
I'm Donna Kelly. We'll see you soon. Stay tuned for all of our wall-to-wall coverage of the inaugural events.
The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where 2 hours from now, a man from Hope, Arkansas, named William Jefferson Clinton, will place his hand on a Bible in crisp, clear weather, recite 35 words, that's right, 35 words, and become the most powerful man on this planet. Good morning, I'm Bernard Shaw. I'll be here throughout this 52nd Inauguration Day, and by my side will be journalist Bill Moyers, who incidentally right now is trapped in a horrific traffic jam. We hope to see him very shortly. And our presidential historian, Michael Beschloss. Well, 15 minutes from now, the car bearing the president and vice president-elect will draw to a halt in the North Drive of the White House. There, the Clintons and the Gores will spend a few moments chatting over coffee with George and Barbara Bush before leaving for that drive to the Capitol. Earlier today, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Gore attended a prayer service at the African Methodist Episcopal Church. His day began, though, when National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft strolled across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House to the Blair House and delivered Mr. Clinton's first daily national security briefing. It seems the troubled world he inherits seems to have taken a pause for his inauguration. These are live pictures right now. You'll be seeing a lot of live pictures throughout this historic day. For the first time in a week, the skies over Iraq are quiet, and we're going to be going to Baghdad very shortly. But first, let's go to White House correspondent Jill Doherty.
Hello, Bernie. Our first view here at the White House of soon-to-be President Clinton will come in just a few minutes, as you mentioned, when both he and Mrs. Clinton, along with the Gores, will be coming to the White House for coffee with President and Mrs. Bush. There will be also some congressional representatives here at the White House. That coffee will last for just about a half an hour. It will be held in the Blue Room. And then from here, the limousines move on. The motorcade goes to Capitol Hill for the swearing-in. Inaugural day for Bill Clinton began early with a visit from President Bush's National Security Advisor, General Brent Scowcroft.
What kind of a shape world in this morning?
A little better.
The general did not say what was discussed, but from the first moments of his presidency, Clinton will be grappling with new overtures from Saddam Hussein. Another early morning visitor to Blair House, Clinton's press secretary, Dee Dee Myers.
Yeah, I'm so nervous, I can't believe it.
The Clintons and the Gores then took part in an inaugural prayer service at a Baptist church not far from the White House. Here at the White House just a few minutes ago, White House Press Secretary Marlin Fitzwater gave some final details of the Bush administration here the last hours at the White House. He said that General Scowcroft in that video that we saw had gone over to give a briefing to Bill Clinton, give him details, security details, including details of the nuclear codes that will be passed over after Bill Clinton takes the oath of office. He said after that, General Scowcroft came back, briefed Mr. Bush one last time as president on security issues. Then Mr. Bush went from the White House over to the old executive office building next door to say goodbye to the White House telephone operators. Mr. Bush then came back, went to the Oval Office, took a final look around, and he left a note for Bill Clinton on the desk, which Mr. Clinton presumably will find this afternoon. Mr. Bush then went down to the South grounds, took a solitary walk around the grounds with his dog, and then came back. Asked about Mr. Bush's mood, Fitzwater said the following.
He's taking a look at the last time at the White House, where he spent a good many years, and so I think his mood is as you would expect, and so some sadness about leaving the White House complex, but similarly anticipation to get on with his private life.
So a certain feeling of nostalgia here at the White House for Mr. Bush, and now events shift. We very soon should be seeing the president-elect, soon-to-be president, here at the White House. Bernie?
Mr. Bush leaving the note on the desk for the incoming president, it reminds me, Michael Beschloss, that is what Ronald Reagan did for George Bush. The last thing Reagan did was leave a little note in the desk drawer. These transitions have not always been this civilized, have they?
No, they really haven't. You know, we think of all the time an outgoing president and incoming president, whatever their differences, going happily up to Capitol Hill. You know, we've heard a lot about Thomas Jefferson the last few days, one of Bill Clinton's heroes and the namesake, at least as far as his middle name is concerned. John Adams, Jefferson's predecessor, a bitter political enemy of Jefferson, refused to attend the Jefferson inauguration. Even in our own times, in 1953, Harry Truman, who was in a situation of great anger with Dwight Eisenhower, when Eisenhower rolled up to the White House to presumably go in to see the Trumans and have coffee with them, he refused to get out of the car. Finally, Truman had to come out of the White House, get into the car. It was not a very happy conversation.
I've always wondered, what are those two men talking about as they ride up Pennsylvania Avenue? Let's see, this is the first Democrat who will be sworn in on the west front of the Capitol steps. After all, they've been frozen out of the Oval Office for 12 years. What other inauguration tidbits come to your mind?
Well, in fact, the west front business is something that has some political importance, because in 1981, when Ronald Reagan was the first one to be sworn in, looking toward the Lincoln Memorial and toward the west, much was made of the fact that Reagan was a Westerner, and this was a case of someone looking toward the area in which he had derived a great deal of political support.
Let's go to Wolf Blitzer now, who tells us about how this president-elect has been working very feverishly on the speech of speeches.
Bernie, we are told by President-elect Clinton's aides that Clinton himself did indeed work very feverishly on his speech. Indeed, over these past several weeks has been reading a lot of presidential inauguration speeches and learning from them, trying to gain some insight into what he is going to say today. We're told that he is striving to speak for about 20 minutes, that most of the themes will be domestic themes, but there will be some involving international affairs. He wants to address some of the immediate issues around the world in his inauguration, and that he's been drafting the speech literally up to this very moment. As far as I know, we still do not have an advanced text. This is typical of the Clinton style. He himself wants to have that input. Now, if you can see me over here, I'm standing behind the podium where Clinton will, of course, be sworn in as the 42nd president. And even only a few moments ago, workers were stapling in this red carpeting to make sure that everything was in place, no one would trip over it. You can see 5 leather chairs here in front of the lectern, behind the lectern actually. They will of course involve Clinton and Vice President-elect Al Gore, as well as President Bush and Vice President Quayle. The 5th chair is for Senator Wendell Ford of Kentucky, who serves as Master of Ceremonies because he is chairman of the Senate Rules Committee. The situation now is that guests are only beginning to arrive. I see former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral William Crowe, who was an early Clinton supporter, and of course I also see Leon Firth, who's one of Clinton's new national security advisors, who will be working with Clinton in the White House. The spectacular view here is really impressive. One thing I will point out, though, that because it is chilly, it's sunny, but it is chilly, they've made special arrangements to make sure all the VIPs are toasty and warm. They've got real nice floor heaters in front of those 5 leather chairs, and they got smaller heaters back here for some of us who are trying to also stay a little warm in this situation. Bernie?
Thank you very much, Wolf. Talking about comfort there on that inauguration podium. Yesterday, former House Speaker Tip O'Neill was here in the studio, and I said, "Are you going to wear long johns?" And he said, "You better believe I'm going to be wearing long johns out there." Incidentally, he said this will be his 13th inauguration. Michael Beschloss, Bill Clinton has made many a speech. We remember the '88 speech at the convention that was this long. We remember the Madison Square Garden acceptance speech. This speech is different, though.
One way it's different is he's going to be giving it in a very cold climate with an audience that'll be very uneager to listen to a long speech. I think Clinton realizes that a good inaugural speech really made the difference, both for Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy. Here are 2 presidents who, even after they were elected, were rarely thought of as potentially great presidents. After they gave very good inaugural speeches, that was very often said of them. We know that Bill Clinton, when he was an undergraduate at Georgetown University, not long after the Kennedy assassination, studied very carefully John Kennedy's rhetoric and how that helped John Kennedy to be a very effective president. We also know that he is an admirer of Thomas Jefferson's speech, Franklin Roosevelt's first, and Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural. We can expect to see traces of that rhetoric, I think, in the speech we hear today.
And Michael, it's clear that this is a man who has to feel certain things. He went to Mount Vernon, and he went to the gravesite of the late President Kennedy. So we'll be listening very closely to that speech. There's still something going on, even though this young man is going to become the 42nd President of the United States. There's a lot going on. Our former senior White House correspondent, Charles Bierbauer, joins us now to talk about the transition and to talk about a foreign policy issue that just would not go away during the Bush administration. Charles, good morning.
Good morning, Bernie. Well, President Bush, shortly after the election, said he wanted to make this transition as smooth as possible. At the time, there was no Iraqi problem. There was no Somali relief effort. There was no end in sight in Bosnia. Post-election, President Bush went to work with a fury in his favorite arena of foreign policy. He sent troops to Somalia. He launched attacks on Iraq and Baghdad. And for good measure, he signed a strategic arms treaty with Boris Yeltsin in Moscow, saving President Clinton, when he's in office, a little work in that dimension. On international policies, the Clinton team was put quickly into place, and the national security advisors of the outgoing and incoming president meshed rather well through the difficult period in dealing with Iraq. But foreign policy was hardly where Bill Clinton would have liked his focus to have lain in this transition period. Former President Jimmy Carter described this as a distraction for the president-elect. The ceasefire, even though that has been offered in Baghdad, does not make Mr. Clinton's life any easier necessarily. He is still going to have to figure out how to deal with Saddam Hussein, whether this is genuine, whether this is a ploy, whether this is an effort to divide the U.S. and its allies. The president-elect on other fronts, well, there was some slippage in getting his team in place, perhaps partly due to Mr. Clinton's nature in general to be methodical, to be deliberate in getting things done. And as election or inauguration day approached, there were relatively few Clinton people ready to take their positions to move into the desks and the offices around Washington. There was, I might add, some gloating on the part of some people in the Bush administration about this. There were problems with some of his inaugurees, Zoe Baird, who's going to head up the Attorney General's office if confirmed. Ron Brown, the head of the Democratic Party, soon to be the Commerce Secretary, had some difficulties. President Bush made a point of saying that he was ready to govern from day one when he was elected. Mr. Clinton will have to be ready to govern from day one. He may have a little difficulty administering. Bernie?
Thank you, Charles. And a man in Baghdad is trying very mightily to try to see that in his governance, Bill Clinton is a bit easier on his government, referring obviously to President Saddam Hussein of Iraq. Brent Sadler is in Iraq's capital. Brent, we were surprised to find out that in these last 48 hours, Saddam Hussein is capable of a diplomatic move.
Yes, indeed, Bernie. Of course, the timing of this was perfect, wasn't it? It was right at the transitional period. Saddam Hussein said, look, I'll stop shooting at the Allied warplanes. Let's have a so-called honeymoon period, and let's start talking. What it does, it puts all the major issues on hold, that is all. We've had no reports of any confrontations in either the northern or southern no-fly zones today. And Saddam Hussein is banking that this change in presidency at the White House is going to improve his position. Ever since Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, the Iraqi propaganda machine has concentrated all its efforts on blaming not the United Nations Security Council or indeed the will of the international community for Iraq's problems, but former President George Bush himself. And the words cursed and criminal were always mentioned when George Bush was discussed by Iraqi government officials or on street demonstrations. Of course, Iraqis have got very used to shouting the now familiar to us all, down, down Bush slogans through the streets of Baghdad. Of course, that has all finished, and so far we are not hearing any disparaging remarks about Bill Clinton. However, this morning, the Iraqi Information Minister, Hamid Yusuf Hamadi, gave the new president some advice. He said that he should sack all his advisors at the Departments of Defense and State because they were all yes men who only read the lips of the former president. So Saddam Hussein's overture to the new administration does not mean he's changed his ways in any way. He wants to regain control over both the northern and southern no-fly zones and wants UN sanctions eased, if not lifted altogether. He may have backed off for now, but his missiles are still in those exclusion zones, and I understand that his armed forces will retaliate if the Allies were to go against those missiles. UN inspection flights should start again shortly, but there's no guarantee from any side that hostilities won't start again. Bernie.
Thank you, Brent Sadler. Coming up, a live interview with a man who's very familiar with international crises and hostilities, Dr. Henry Kissinger, in a moment. Well, he's here. Bill Moyers has just joined us, fresh from a limousine that was clogged around the State Department.
I was in a small Ford. The limousines around the State Department hemmed us in like they were front linesmen at the Super Bowl, and we couldn't get out.
Michael Beschloss, presidential historian, also here. Mr. Clinton has a lot of things on his platter, and not all of them are delicate. Let's go, or delicacies. Let's go to our world affairs correspondent, Ralph Begleiter, who will tell us about that.
Bernie, around the world, attention is divided between watching the transfer of power taking place here in Washington today and the tensions of conflict in the Persian Gulf, the Middle East, and in the war in the very heart of Europe in former Yugoslavia. Bill Clinton will have 2 active military operations to supervise the moment he becomes commander-in-chief in less than 2 hours. U.S. forces are active around Iraq and in Somalia. It's reminiscent, really, of the inauguration of Richard Nixon, when Nixon inherited the Vietnam War from Lyndon Johnson. But in a way, it's also quite different. More than before, Bill Clinton's inauguration is being watched around the world because he'll be the first post-Cold War U.S. president. He'll be managing, actually shaping, a new role for the United States as the world's only political and military superpower. Around the world, people want to know how Bill Clinton will see the new U.S. role and how it'll affect them. For instance, will Clinton do anything to stop the atrocities, the rape, the murder in Bosnia? Will he do anything about the continuing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians? Will he do anything to ease the tensions in the Persian Gulf, which built to a crescendo under George Bush? And almost every other nation, including all the new ones formed after the breakup of the Soviet Union, have questions about how the change of government in Washington will affect them. Bernie?
Thank you, Ralph. Joining us live from New York, former Secretary of State Dr. Henry Kissinger. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
How important is it that Bill Clinton resist the temptation of putting on a badge and becoming the world's cop?
I think the United States has to choose its military commitments extremely carefully, because it is one thing to begin a military operation. It's another to extricate yourself from it. And I do not think the United States can become the world's cop. On the other hand, there are problems in the world to which the United States can make a significant contribution. To choose what is significant and what we cannot do by ourselves is one of his principal tasks.
What's uppermost in your mind?
I believe the most fundamental problem, and indeed the greatest opportunity for President Clinton, is that there hasn't been an opportunity like this since the early days of the Truman administration. That is to say, there's an international system that has totally changed with the collapse of the two-power world. We are now in a world in which there are 4 or 5 major power centers. There's turmoil in many parts of the world. I think even the Iraqi problem is not primarily a problem of what they do in the no-fly zones, but a problem of stability and balance in the Gulf. And I think that the opportunity exists for the Clinton administration to define an international order, or whatever you want to call it, that for decades will then be followed by subsequent administrations with tactical variations. And in fact, if he doesn't manage to do this, there will be more and more turmoil around the world.
Practically, with the ascendancy of Iran and with Iraq and Saddam Hussein with his hands on the power levers, what can a President Clinton do about that situation without destabilizing that region?
Well, I don't believe that Saddam can be conciliated. There are 2 dangers in the Gulf. One is fundamentalist Iran, the other is radical Iraq. Now, every once in a while, the 2 are in conflict, and that is helpful to us, but they're not in conflict to do us any favors, and they're not in conflict because one of them has become more moderate. They're in conflict because they're rivals. Unfortunately, in the Gulf, the situation is such that if we do not want that area overrun by one or the other or both, we have to create some sort of an international balance in which outside forces help the moderate regimes in the Arabian Peninsula. That is the preeminent task, and that is more important even than the day-to-day management of the UN resolutions.
Dr. Kissinger, do you think the full blossom of a Middle East peace will happen on Bill Clinton's watch?
I think that President Clinton has an unusual opportunity not to make a full peace, because after all, most wars in history have started between countries that were at peace. The significant thing that I think is possible is to make an interim agreement, or both on the West Bank and perhaps with Syria. And I think it may be easier for both sides if they can present whatever they agree to as not yet final, so that they don't have to answer the question whether they have made their ultimate decision. And then if it lasts 5 or 10 years, one can look again. And 5 or 10 years of quiet in the Middle East would be a huge achievement. And I think that is possible.
How strongly is Bill Clinton's hand helped by the presence of Al Gore as his vice president?
I think that Vice President Gore has, at least in my limited experience with him, I've always found him to be well informed on international affairs and very sensible about international affairs. And he can certainly give good advice. The problem, though, is the final decisions have to be taken by the president. And the most important thing that the president can do is not let himself get triggered into a whole series of ad hoc actions in order to demonstrate leadership abilities. The most important thing he's got to do is to define a sense of coherent direction for the administration so that there is some destination in view, and the tactical business will, there'll be many opportunities for that.
As we speak, the president-elect is standing under the canopy at Blair House on Pennsylvania Avenue, diagonally across from the White House. He and Mrs. Clinton will be going to the White House very shortly for coffee with the Bushes. Dr. Kissinger, the very delicate matter of the 42nd president of the United States having what some people say is no experience whatsoever in international affairs.
Well, that is true, but the most important problem may be that our nation has no experience with the kind of foreign policy that we are likely to have to conduct in the years ahead, so that he at least can start with a fresh mind. Our experience as a nation has been either isolationist or dominant. It's been either that we could withdraw from the world or that we were the leading element of a coalition, the dominant element of a coalition in a two-power world. Now we're going to be living in a world where there are 4, 5, 6 more or less equal countries, except with respect to nuclear weapons, which will become less and less relevant to most of the issues that arise. And the president and this administration has to define an architecture for this, and everybody starts from scratch, and from some points of view there's even some advantage in not being encumbered with some of the problems of the past. But that, all we can do is now is wish him all the success.
Indeed. Thanks very much to you for being part of our Inauguration Day coverage. Dr. Henry Kissinger in New York, in a very warm CNN studio. On the streets of Washington, the crowds are gathering. It'll approach the mid-40s here in the nation's capital. Everyone is standing around trying to stay warm in anticipation of the inauguration of the 42nd President of the United States. The Clintons have just arrived under the White House North Portico. CNN's live coverage of this historic day in the United States of America will continue in a moment. White House, the Bushes, the Clintons, they were about to go in, having just gotten out of their limousine, but the photographer said, one more picture, and they're getting that. The very gracious Barbara Bush greeting Hillary Clinton. The Gores. President Bush saying good luck to you. Joe Doherty told us that President Bush quickly wrote out a note and left it on the desk in the Oval Office for his successor. They're going to be having coffee at the White House before getting into the limousine. Commerce Secretary there, Ron Brown. Bill Clinton's man at the Democratic National Committee. Bill Moyers, you've seen this scene many, many times before. You've been there before.
It's a marvelous moment when the passions of politics fade away and the protocol of government takes over. You know, these men don't like each other very much. Bush is said to dislike Clinton intensely, and I don't think there's any love lost on the other side. And yet in this transfer of power, there is a momentary truce between parties, between adversaries that is really a sparkling change for this city that is, as you know, Bernie, better than I, always caught up in quarrels and feuds, ambitions and aspirations. I'd like to read that note, wouldn't you, that Bush left?
I certainly would like to read it. One little thing, yesterday Tip O'Neill said he was in the Capitol seeing the doctor, and he heard that President Bush was downstairs having lunch, so he went down. And Tip O'Neill says when he saw Bush, he wished him well, but O'Neill looked Bush in the eyes and said, you know, you ran one of the most awful campaigns in the history of the Republican Party. And Bush very graciously said, well, Tip, you and I have known each other for a long time, and you've always spoken your mind.
He reminds me of the Germans and the Allied troops singing Silent Night on Christmas in the trenches of World War I before they, at dawn the next morning, began to shoot each other. That's this town.
We're going to pause for a moment because some of our cable stations will want to take a break. And from Hope, Arkansas to Washington, D.C., the road is much longer than it seems. Joining us from Capitol Hill, Gene Randall, to tell us how Bill Clinton made it.
Good morning, Bernie. Well, he did it with political skill, toughness, and luck. It was a combination Clinton attached to an appealing message that it was time to put America's domestic house in order, time to get the long-suffering economy moving in the right direction, time to help what he called the forgotten middle class. Clinton also used an appealing campaign style, dramatically illustrated during the first bus trip out of the Democratic convention in New York. By the time that motorcade reached St. Louis about a week later, it was apparent in the enormous crowds that turned out something was stirring in America's heartland and that Bill Clinton recognized it. Those trips made it clear large numbers of Americans were looking for change. Many along the way decided that Bill Clinton and his young running mate Al Gore, with their generational appeal, represented the best available opportunity for making that change happen. Campaigning as he might have done for governor, Clinton played the crowds well, displaying a genuine passion for people. These pictures, by the way, are from the African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Washington, where Clinton attended church services this morning. A big reason Clinton so often ran behind in his schedule was his passion for people. He had a tough time leaving a crowd during the campaign. As the phrase went, until the last dog dies. He would try to shake every hand, sometimes twice. Bill Clinton has indeed pulled back from some basic campaign pledges. The middle-class tax cut has gone away. He says he'll consider a new gasoline tax, which he rejected during the campaign. He may not have his economic message ready for Congress as soon as he promised. But public opinion surveys show that Bill Clinton has picked up in popularity during the transition. He has also gained on the question of trust. Given the task he faces, Clinton can use all the goodwill he can get. He, after all, got to this day on the strength of a promise to attack the problems here at home, as he put it, with laser-like intensity. The transition from candidate to President Clinton has no doubt shown the new president, or the new president-to-be, that too singular a focus on domestic issues is a luxury he can ill afford. He inherits just too many crises in the world. The poll number he may need most in the days ahead is the one that shows understanding. Bernie?
Thank you, Gene. Symbolically, Mr. Bush and Mr. Clinton represent different generations. The transition that we've talked about so much is looked at now, and certainly the presidency of George Herbert Walker Bush, by our public opinion analyst, Bill Schneider, who joins us. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Bernie. Well, we asked the voters whether they see this inauguration as more of a transition of political parties from Republican to Democratic, or do they see it as a change of generational leadership from the World War II generation, like George Bush, to the baby boomers? And here's what they told us. Which did they see it more as? 58%, almost 60% said they saw it as a change of generations, much more than a change of political parties. The question is, what does that mean? Does that mean that some voters for the first time will feel that their generation has a president? Well, we asked people whether they agreed or disagreed with this statement. When Bill Clinton takes office, I will feel for the first time that the country has a president who really understands my personal values and experiences. Now, we got a surprising answer. Most voters said no, they disagreed with that. And look at the baby boomers. They disagreed in about the same proportion. So it isn't that they feel a special connection with Clinton's values and experiences. What people do feel is that baby boomers have a better understanding of some issues, those that came onto the political agenda when they were maturing as a generation. You know, the formative experiences of the World War II generation were not just the war, but also the Depression. For the baby boom generation, the formative experiences were the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War and the protests associated with it, and of course the Watergate scandal. Now, we asked voters which generation, World War II or baby boom leadership, would do a better job handling the role of women, the environment, and race relations. And you can see there's a solid agreement here that the baby boomers would do a better job. Even the World War II generation voters felt that baby boomers would do a better job because they're more conscious of those issues, they are more sensitive to them. On other issues, the agreement was not quite as clear. For instance, we asked which generation would do a better job handling health care and economic problems. You can see most people said the baby boomers, but the World War II voters weren't entirely sure about that because their feeling is their generation got us out of the worst depression in American history. The baby boomers undoubtedly feel that the old ideas about health care and economic problems have failed. By the way, you can see there's no difference on the issue of honesty in government. Foreign policy is where the voters tilt towards the World War II generation. World War II led the country to a triumphant victory. That generation fought that war. The only foreign policy experience the baby boomers ever had was with Vietnam, and that remains a bitter memory. That may be why when we asked Americans, how confident are you in Bill Clinton's ability to handle the Iraq crisis when he takes over, the voters said they were somewhat, but not very confident in his ability to lead that foreign policy issue.
Thank you very much, Bill Schneider. Coming up, Wolf Blitzer's interview with the President-elect. The place to be, Capitol Hill. The crowds are gathering up there. Wolf Blitzer's been up there for a while. Wolf?
Here on the podium, Bernie, there are a lot of people already, but more are expected. Now, President-elect Clinton, of course, has very specific views on a wide range of issues. And last week, I had a chance to sit down in Little Rock with him at the governor's mansion, and discuss many of those views with the President-elect. Governor, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate the time you're taking only a few days before the inauguration. You're about to embark on, obviously, what is a critical period, not only in your life, but in the life of the United States. So many decisions to make, and you're not going to really have any breathing time. As far as the international situation is concerned, there's tension with Iraq, certainly. U.S. troops are deployed in Somalia. But at the Pentagon, and you probably know I covered the Pentagon for a long time, the greatest fear is that U.S. troops will be introduced into Bosnia, former Yugoslavia. In order to stop the slaughter there, are you prepared to expand the U.S. military involvement to get that situation resolved?
Well, let me say, first of all, there are a lot of things that can be done short of the introduction of ground forces, which we have not done yet. And I'm prepared to say that I would entertain some of them. I also have to say that I'm somewhat encouraged by the peace proposals which have been made and the responses of the sides to them. I know there's some great difficulties now, particularly in light of the assassination of the Bosnian leader. But I still hope that we can work that out. And I think the United States should be very aggressive through the United Nations in trying to keep as many people alive as possible there, and trying to work out a settlement, and most important of all, in trying to get the civilized world to stand up to the idea of ethnic cleansing. It's a horrible notion. It has justified massive rapes and abuse of women and children, and it has grave potential to spread to other ethnic hotspots around the world. So I think we're going to have to be actively involved there, and I hope that I can play a constructive role.
Well, you sound as if you're prepared to dramatically expand as Commander-in-Chief, which is you're about to become.
I don't want to say that. For one thing, even if I were prepared to do that, I wouldn't say it today, because President Bush is going to be president for 8 more days. And because I would have to have extensive military as well as diplomatic briefings beyond even what I've had to date to make any sort of decision like that. I would just say again that, as I did in the campaign, that there are many options available to us short of the introduction of ground forces. And that the United Nations and the rest of Europe and the United States, it seems to me, has a real stake in standing up now to the idea of ethnic cleansing, which is going to manifest itself in the innocents dying in record numbers in Bosnia unless something is done, and I hope we can do something.
Well, even if the Europeans don't do anything, can the United States unilaterally do something beyond the all-or-nothing options that the military, at least the Pentagon, seems to put forward?
Well, I'm not prepared to commit the United States to doing anything at this point in the absence of United Nations support, but the answer to your question is, as a theoretical matter, there are absolutely things that can be done short of the introduction of ground forces.
So you're obviously, on top of this situation, you must be heartsick when you see these stories of the rapes and the killings and all of that. I mean, how much does that affect your thinking when you see these pictures, these images on television?
It affects my thinking. It affects my feeling. When I see those things and when I read the stories of the women and the children, their own personal accounts, of course it has an impact. But I have to think about, too, what we can really do, what we can get done, what will make a difference. But yes, I think we have to try to do as much as we can to stop that.
What about Iraq? Let me just briefly ask you. Saddam Hussein, is he someone that you think the world still can deal with, or is that just fiction? If you could say something to him right now, what would you say?
I would tell him to stop the persecution of his own people, to stop violating the United Nations ceasefire agreement, to stop his compulsive testing the will of the United States and the United Nations. I would tell him not to expect that there is a substantial difference between George Bush and Bill Clinton on the question of Iraq. That is an American position rooted in the United Nations resolution. And I would tell him that if he spent just half as much time worrying about the welfare of his own people as he has trying to figure out how to get out from under the UN ceasefire resolution and stick it to his own people in the North and in the South, he'd be better off, and so would they. And if he really wants better relationships with my administration, which he says he does, there's one way to get them. He can change his conduct.
Any sense that he will?
I don't know. I'm just mystified by this latest round of shenanigans. I'm mystified by it. I think he must have somehow believed that because we're in a period of political transition and because we're preoccupied with our efforts in Somalia, which I support, and with the press of events in Bosnia, that somehow we just let it slide. I don't understand that, but he is, I think, once again, he is in danger of badly misgauging the American system and America's resolve.
Maybe even you. Is he misinterpreting what you stand for?
Well, I think I've been pretty clear on that. You know, there is my Secretary of Defense designate, Congressman Aspen, said the other day, there has been no daylight between our position and the Bush administration position on Iraq.
Let me ask you one other international question before we go to some of the domestic policy issues. Boris Yeltsin, you've spoken with him now. He's obviously in trouble. The whole post-Cold War era seems to be teetering a little bit. When will you meet with him?
Pretty soon, I hope. We haven't finalized the date, but we're working on it soon. And
Are we talking about weeks, months, years?
No, not years. And if months, not many months.
Early in your administration?
Oh, yes, yes. I'm going to do what I can to help him because I think he's genuinely committed to democracy and to free market economics, and because I think he's doing the very best he can given the experience of his country and its leadership over the last 50, 60 years. I think Yeltsin is the best hope we have in Russia for moving toward democracy and free market economics and continuing the move toward disarmament. I like him personally, and I think he's doing his best. And he's like everybody else in a new and unfamiliar situation. He's had some things to learn, and he's learning them as he goes along. But America has, in my judgment, a big stake in continuing democracy, market economics, and disarmament in Russia. And Yeltsin represents those things.
Would the meeting be in Russia, the United States, or a third country?
We haven't decided.
What's your inclination?
Well, my inclination would be within limits to try to work out something that's good for him, too. But I can't go there anytime real soon. I've got to get our domestic economic program and the budget and other things up and going first.
Well, speaking about your domestic economic program, budget deficit numbers are obviously a lot worse than you were led to believe in the middle of the campaign. Does that mean all of your campaign promises are now open and up for revision, and that you're starting fresh when you become president?
Well, no, it doesn't mean that. We still have, the basic facts have not changed. We've got a huge deficit that has to be dealt with. We have a health care system with costs raging out of control, both tax cost and private dollar cost. And we have not invested enough in our economy and our people to be competitive in global competition. So we got an investment deficit and a budget deficit and a huge health care problem. And I have the difficult challenge of trying to deal with all three of them at the same time. But I'm convinced if you just tried to generate jobs and you forgot about the deficit, it would run interest rates up and weaken the economy terribly. If you've just tried to solve the deficit by raising taxes and cutting spending and you paid no attention to jobs and incomes, you'd never get the deficit solved because the economy would go down and revenues wouldn't come in the first place. And if you try to deal with either one of them without changing fundamentally the way we finance health care, then I think that our efforts would be doomed to failure. So this great challenge I face is to do that. But I think that fundamentally the commitments of the campaign will have to be kept because the direction we have to go in has not changed. Now what has changed is we've got a bigger debt than we thought. We're going to have to work harder to cut that debt down to size in the next 4 years and indeed over the next 6 to 8 years. But I think that we can do it. It's just going to require a little more rigor on the part of the President, the Congress, and the American people. They're going to have to be willing to participate in this.
Middle-class tax cut?
Makes it harder. It's a lot harder because the deficit's so much bigger.
Will you
particularly since when we offered it in New Hampshire, it was designed for economic stimulus, and there may be other things that will stimulate the economy better. But I will say this. Fundamentally, the idea that the tax system is unfair is still true. It is still true that because of the enormous increases in the Social Security tax and because of what's happened at the state and local level, working people are paying a much higher percentage of their income in taxes than wealthy people are, and we have to try to do something to deal with that.
Are you prepared yet to tell the middle class that they too are going to have to accept greater pain and suffering in the short term in order to see the economy improve in the long term?
Well, I think, first of all, if you go back through the whole campaign, I think all the one thing that everybody's going to have to face is we're going to have to change this healthcare system. Then we're going to have to deal with the entitlements issue, which will affect some people in the middle class. And we're going to have to do the best we can with the deficit. I'm prepared to tell, I think all the American people, including the middle class, are willing to make a sacrifice to get out of these difficulties, get this economy growing, get this debt off our kids' shoulders, if, but only if, they think it's fair and they think we're really going to follow through. So what I'm trying to do now is to put together the elements of a very fair program that has the real promise of becoming the law of the land. I think Congress is prepared to act too. I think they got the message from the last election.
Now, a lot of politicians, a lot of presidents act only in terms of short-term political requirements and ignore the long term. Are you prepared politically to take those courageous decisions which will make you unpopular in the short term in order to see this problem resolved?
Yes, of course, because the American people, as I said all during the election, have got to recognize that this budget problem has been coming on us for a dozen years. But our problems with investment and productivity and income growth, they've been coming on us for nearly 20 years now. We did not get into these difficulties overnight. We're not going to get out of them overnight. If all I do are things that are popular in the short run, I can compound those long-term problems. So what I'm trying to do is to figure out a way, as I said, to give the American people a job growth economy, to do something about health care costs, and to do something about the deficit, and to try to do all of them at the same time, because if you try to do one without the others, you'll never get there.
Let me ask you a personal question about Chelsea. You've decided to send her to a private school. Someone who's committed to public education as you are. For you and Mrs. Clinton, this must have been an agonizing, difficult, wrenching decision.
It was a very tough decision.
What were the factors?
All of us have always been in public schools, except I went to a Catholic school for 2 years when I was very young. But otherwise, we've all been in public schools throughout before we went to college. And I have loved being a parent and a PTA member in the Little Rock Public Schools. And I found a couple of schools I was real interested in Washington, and Chelsea was too. In the end, the decision was made with heavy involvement from my daughter based on her personal circumstances only. I mean, she's the only child of the President of the United States. She's going into a town where she doesn't know a lot of people or their parents. She's about to enter adolescence. She'll soon be 13 years old. It is not an easy time. And the decision we made to send her to a school that's a private school but is racially and economically integrated, where community service is part of the requirement of being a student there, was the decision we felt was best for her personally, because we want her to have as normal a childhood as possible. It was not in any way a rejection of the public schools in Washington. As I said, we found one in particular we looked very, very closely at. But we did what we thought would give Chelsea the best chance to have the most normal life possible. And I think that was our responsibility as parents.
You know, I've seen you at these news conferences when you make these announcements, your cabinet selections, and you very often get rather sentimental, as you probably know. It looks like tears are beginning to come into your eyes from time to time. What pushes that button? Why are you sentimental like that?
Well, first of all, because my work is very personal to me. I mean, I'm very proud personally of some of these people I've appointed and I've known for a long time. I'm proud of all of them, but a lot of them I have some real history with. And it gives me a great sense of pride to give them a chance to serve. And secondly, I try never to forget that all this is really about all those folks that were on the roads during those bus tours. And it's very emotional to me, the thought that I might be really finally able to do something that will help them to change their lives. It's very exciting and it's very emotional. And when I think about some of these people that I appointed to the cabinet, for example, that I believe in so strongly, and what they could do because the voters made me president, it's an emotional thing.
When you're going to be walking down Pennsylvania Avenue on January 20th, I assume you'll be walking. What are you going to be thinking about? What's going to be going through your mind at that moment?
Oh, I think several things. I think I'll be happy and grateful. I think that I'll also be really determined to do what I can to make good on the commitments I made to the American people to move this country forward and to help us make the changes we need. I mean, every day I wake up and I think, you know, we just can't lose the forest for the trees. We just can't get all caught up in the day-to-day work of this and forget what's out there. And when I walk up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, I'm going to be looking for the faces of the people that put us there. And I'm going to be determined to avoid the isolation that has sunk the presidencies of some of my predecessors, and to try to just keep in touch with those folks and be faithful to them.
How are you going to keep in touch with those average people when you're boxed in there?
Well, I have to get out there with them a lot, and I'll have to bring some of them in to see me, and I'll have to organize the people who are working for me in the cabinet and in the White House so that they have time to go out there and really listen and relate. Easy to get out of touch. A lot of good people have done it. We're going to do our best not to do it.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you.
We're back here live in Washington, and as you can see from these pictures, President-elect Bill Clinton and President Bush are getting ready to leave the White House, make the drive over here to Capitol Hill, where in about 1 hour, Clinton will be sworn in as the 42nd President of the United States. The crowd here at Capitol Hill at the podium is beginning to get very, very excited. The atmosphere here, especially among the Clinton aides, is very tense. They're nervous, they're excited, they're clearly happy. One of them recently, just a few moments ago, said to me that she hasn't been able to stop grinning and smiling and even crying over these past few days as this climactic moment approaches. And certainly, Bernie, as I look out over the Washington Mall and see these people listen to the congressional chorus sing America right now, it's an emotional moment for not only all of the Americans who are here, but those of us who are reporters and who have been covering Clinton in Little Rock over these past 2.5 months during the transition. It's exciting, too, to see that he has made this transition relatively smoothly, although there have been some bumps along the road. Bernie?
Thank you very much, Wolf Blitzer. 59 minutes left in the Bush administration, and things are still happening. To the Pentagon, and Jamie McIntyre.
Well, Bernie, late word that President Bush has extended Dick Cheney's term of office as a Secretary of Defense until 4 o'clock this afternoon, or until Les Aspin is sworn in, whichever comes first. A Pentagon spokesman, Pete Williams, saying the unusual move is being made because of ongoing U.S. military operations, so that, in Williams' words, there will be no link missing in the chain of command. Les Aspin is expected to be confirmed by the Senate this afternoon and sworn in on Capitol Hill in a private ceremony. He'll be sworn in by David Cook, who is the Pentagon's senior civilian official. He'll administer the oath of office. Cook is the Director of Administration and Management. He's sworn in all the Secretaries of Defense since Melvin Laird. A formal swearing-in will be conducted at the Pentagon at a later time for Les Aspin, but that initial swearing-in will take place this afternoon. This is an unusual move, but it doesn't really indicate anything too unusual going on. We're told that Secretary Cheney is at his home getting ready to move to Wyoming, and the Pentagon reports no new incidents in Iraq in any of the no-fly zones. Bernie?
Thank you, Jamie. Bill Moyer's Michael Beschloss, clearly a signal to the world in general, and perhaps to one leader in particular.
Yes, not to monkey around with us, that even though our attentions are devoted to this celebration today, the guard is still up. It's a modest but important symbol, I think, at this time.
And, you know, it's so unusual that a new president takes office at the time of an intense military campaign like Iraq. Eisenhower came in during the Korean War. Richard Nixon came in during Vietnam, but there was not this kind of day-by-day changing situation that there is here. It's a very serious and good precaution to make sure that no miscalculations are made in Baghdad.
But they really want to make sure that that dark cloud on the horizon there remain as small as it in fact really is, and not become the giant that overwhelms this day here in this country.
The consummate symbol of continuity. The Clintons, the Bushes, the Gores, the Quayles, they're in the limousines slowly moving around the east side of the Treasury building, making that left turn, and then up Pennsylvania Avenue, where the Capitol dome is glistening under a very bright Washington sun. CNN's live coverage of Inauguration Day 1993 will continue in a moment. Skies over the United States Capitol some 54 minutes before William Jefferson Clinton stands in its shadow and takes the presidential oath of office. Moments from now, the Democratic transfer of power becomes complete in this city of monuments. Repeatedly this week, the name of John Fitzgerald Kennedy has been invoked, along with the images of Camelot. Today, it is the Clinton Democrats who get the keys to the castle, which has so long eluded the party. The Clintons began this day attending services at an African Methodist Episcopal church, and will end it attending a whirl of inaugural balls. CNN will have live coverage tonight with Susan Ruck. But first things first. The Clintons and Gores went to the White House about half an hour ago for coffee with the Bushes, the Quayles, and invited guests. You're watching the live pictures of the motorcade bringing these dignitaries to Capitol Hill. Millie the dog, incidentally, was on hand to greet them at the door. Got a pat from the president-elect. No word on Socks the Clinton cat. Now to Wolf Blitzer on Capitol Hill. He gives us a preview of President-elect Bill Clinton's speech.
Well, Bernie, we're in for a surprise when the new president, in about an hour, does deliver his acceptance speech, his inaugural speech, because it will be a very, very brief speech, especially according to Clinton standards. Indeed, Clinton aides are now telling us that this speech will be the third shortest inaugural speech in U.S. history. Only Presidents George Washington and Abraham Lincoln had a shorter speech. The speech will only be about 2.5 pages. It will try to summarize the major themes that Clinton wants to project for his campaign, for his administration, themes that he enunciated many times during the campaign and during the transition. But because he was so widely criticized over the past several years for going on and speaking, especially at the Democratic convention 4 years ago, and indeed in his acceptance speech in New York this past summer, I guess he decided that he wanted to make a short and concise speech, get on with it, and then begin his administration on a new note. Bernie?
Thank you very much, Wolf. Well, we've known transitions, and we've known transitions. Michael Beschloss, Bill Moyers, you must have some very specific thoughts about the contrasts and the handing off of power in this town.
That's for sure, Bernie. You know, just looking at this morning, you know, it's very easy to remember that this is, in a way, a counterpoint to the transition of 1981, when Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale gave way to Ronald Reagan and George Bush. That was probably the most brutal transition of recent times. Ronald Reagan not only disagreed with Jimmy Carter on many ideological grounds, he also disliked him, and he also wanted to use the transition to make a statement both in the United States and around the world that there was a very different president here. Many symbols. It was let out that when Reagan went in to see President Carter in the Oval Office, and Carter began to brief him on various aspects of the job he was about to assume, Reagan rather ostentatiously did not take notes. That got around, and it gave a large message to the people in the administration, the new one, and the American people as well.
For me, the transition that comes to mind is the one in 1960, not only because I was there, but because it has some attributes similar to today. An older man who had served the nation in war, Dwight Eisenhower, passing the torch to a much younger man. And the comparison to me is that George Bush is a warrior of the Cold War, passing the torch to a much younger man, but that Bush, like Eisenhower, had very little interest in being an activist president domestically. Kennedy did want to make changes, and so does Clinton domestically. But even more than Clinton, even more than Kennedy, I think Clinton is going to press on the domestic front in a remarkably different way from Bush. So I think of the passage of age to youth and from an internationalist, interventionist philosophy, Eisenhower and Bush, to a more domestically focused home front.
Going back to what you were saying, Michael, in the Carter to the Bush transition, or Carter to Reagan, it actually got really visceral. We recall that as Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan were riding in the limousines up to Capitol Hill, Jimmy Carter was still on the phone working the hostage situation. The Americans taken hostage at the embassy in Tehran, Iran. And back in the White House, Carter aides and Reagan aides were actually fussing. And a couple of them were told point blank, it's over for you people. We are in charge.
And that sends a very large message to people coming in. The other things that Reagan did during that first day or two were intended to be very politically serviceable to him. Another thing that happened within 24 hours was the Soviet ambassador to the United States came to the State Department, expected to drive his car into the underground garage, a privilege he had been afforded under previous administrations. He was turned away. That was a scene that was played and replayed that showed that there was a new and very different president in power.
Was this Anatoly Dobrynin?
Indeed it was.
Mm-hmm. So Reagan and the Reaganauts were sending a message to the Soviet Union. It's not the same treatment as it was for the last 12 years or 10 years.
That's right, Bill. And you know, there is so much of a mixed message because half of it, a new president is trying to say, we're doing this in a civilized way, there's continuity. Other nations, such as Iraq in 1993, should not try to exploit this, and also to make a large change in politics.
A smiling Chelsea Clinton. We heard her dad, Bill Clinton, in the interview with Wolf Blitzer a short while ago, talking about the very difficult decision that Mr. and Mrs. Clinton had in deciding to send her to Sitwell Friends here, a private school in Washington, and the flack the Clintons are taking. They're sticking by their daughter. They said that the decision to send her to Sitwell Friends they felt was in her best interest given the circumstances surrounding this family soon to become our nation's first family. They continue filing in up at Capitol Hill, the limousines taking the Bushes, the Quayles, the Clintons and the Gores there. Ron Brown, the next Commerce Secretary, arriving. CNN's live coverage will be right back.
To grow stronger, America depends on its bounty, both natural and man-made. Finding new ways to get these goods to market more efficiently and reliably is the noble pursuit of Norfolk Southern. The thoroughbred.
Camera around his neck, and behind Mr. Carter, his Vice President, Walter Mondale. To the right side of your screen, Rosalynn Carter, the last Democratic Party First Lady to occupy the White House, and Mrs. Mondale gesturing. They are on the Capitol Hill right now, but downtown on Pennsylvania Avenue, one of the best spots, aside from the presidential parade reviewing stand, one of the best spots is right across the street from that reviewing stand on Pennsylvania Avenue. Candy Crowley, you have a good spot today.
Absolutely, it's the catbird seat, certainly for the inaugural parade. I am right across the street from the reviewing stand where President Clinton and assorted dignitaries will be watching this inaugural parade. So while they get ready for the orderly and peaceful transition of power, we're getting ready for that inaugural parade, a somewhat disorderly and very raucous celebration of the serious business going on Capitol Hill. Right now, the folks have begun to gather. We don't see too many right here, but along the way, some of these people have slept overnight just hoping to get a good spot. There are very few free spots along the way. Tickets have ranged from $10 to $100 along the parade route. Now, what they are doing now, since we cannot see or hear a lot of what's going up on Capitol Hill, is they have provided some pre-parade festivities. This is all in keeping with Bill Clinton's idea of an American reunion, an inauguration, and festivities that include everyone. So we've got an eclectic bunch of folks up here, Bernie. I jotted down a couple of them that will be performing for our viewing pleasure. We have the Precision Lawn Chair team. Now, we are told that these people will be wearing very colorful leisure wear. They will be doing some precision drills with their lawn chairs. Their idea, they say, is to be serious about fun. They are dedicated to the promotion of American-made lawn chair products and the American work ethic. Another first here in this parade, the first openly gay band. It is the Lesbian and Gay Bands of America. Again, the first time an openly gay group has participated in the inauguration parade. A little more on the mundane side, but somewhat interesting, the Maine South High School Band. They're from Park Ridge, Illinois. That is Hillary Clinton's high school alma mater. We're also told someone called Widget, a purple alien with an environmental message, is out entertaining those crowds waiting for the parade to begin. And then the Pop Warner cheerleaders. We are told that this is a combination cheerleading and dance team that, among other things, will cheerlead to JFK's inaugural address. So, Bernie, we've got quite a group here. I can't imagine what some of these are going to look like, but we again have the catbird seat. They're expecting maybe over 250,000 people here. It hasn't come cheap. We've been trying to get some kind of estimate what all of these inaugural festivities, beginning on day one, which was Sunday for Bill Clinton when he arrived here, all the way through tomorrow morning's open house at the White House. Now, the Clinton people originally said that all of these festivities would cost around $20 million. Like these estimates tend to go, it has risen quite a bit since then. They're looking to maybe around $30 million, although it's awful hard to get a figure. Back to the booth and Bernie.
Candy, you know what I like most about the position you have?
I'm afraid to ask.
Well, you have the privilege of being able to see the last float of the inaugural parade traditionally, when the Mormon Tabernacle Choir pulls up opposite the President of the United States and sings the battle hymn of the Republic.
Absolutely. I mean, even I might get a few goosebumps.
Well, Mike Beschloss and Bill Moyers and I will be getting lots of goosebumps when that happens. Thanks very much, Candy Crowley. Let's go now to Charles Bierbauer up at the reviewing stand. Charles?
Hello, Bernie. With this day, the political career, the public service career of George Bush comes to a close. He is 68 years old, and he's going home to Houston. Another question, though, lingers over this event, and that is, what is the future of Vice President Dan Quayle, who is only 45 years old, could have a whole career ahead of him, perhaps in some other field than politics. But what about his political options at this point? After today, Mr. Quayle is going to move out to the Maryland suburbs, at least until the school year end, and he and his family are going to return to Indiana. He's going to spend some time working on a book, giving speeches, obviously reviewing his political options. But he's told one interviewer that he would not run, for example, for governor of Indiana, as some suggest he might, that the only office he would ever run for again would be President of the United States. There are some Republicans who do not think Dan Quayle could even get the nomination in '96, let alone win the presidency at that time. They're suggesting he may not even have to run in 1996, when he will no longer have the trappings of the vice presidency, will not be able to capitalize on 8 years in office, but will instead have been 4 years removed. Mr. Quayle perhaps has limited his options, but he does have those to consider, and he has time to look at them as well. There is one thing that may give us some hint as to where Dan Quayle's future lies. At the end of this month, the Republican National Committee will be meeting in St. Louis to choose a new party chairman. One of the candidates is a Quayle man, Spencer Abraham. And at that point, we will judge whether the Republicans are looking in his direction or not. There was, in fact, a poll taken this week of future possibilities for the Republican leadership. And Republicans questioned in that poll picked first of all Jack Kemp, then Senator Bob Dole, and Dan Quayle only came in third. Bernie?
Thank you, Charles. As Charles was speaking moments ago, we saw the members of the United States Supreme Court making their way through the Capitol corridors, and they are a bit behind schedule, but things are inching closer and closer to the moment. When we come back, we're going to hear from Michael Beschloss and Bill Moyers on Dan Quayle. The flag of the United States of America fluttering in a bright, crisp, sunny Washington breeze this Wednesday morning. This is Inauguration Day. All of the VIPs are at the Capitol. Chelsea Clinton smiling, escorted by a naval aide, a young lady who is receiving more attention than she wants, but she is determined to be herself. A short while ago, we heard from Charles Bierbauer as he talked about Dan Quayle. President Jimmy Carter feels very good. He's got a lot to smile about, Mike Beschloss and Bill Moyers. Dan Quayle, does he have a future in the GOP? There's some people who hope that he will, some who hope that he won't.
Well, you know, one historical reference point is the vice president to the gentleman we just saw on screen, Bernie, and that is Jimmy Carter. Walter Mondale ran for president in 1984, 4 years after he and Carter left office. It was actually a great burden to him to have been vice president to a man who suggested defeat to many Democrats who in the summer of 1984 had a hard time even getting a hearing at the Democratic convention. Dan Quayle could be remembered 4 years from now as the person who kept the torch of conservatism alive through the Bush administration, or he might be remembered as a creation of George Bush to be run away from.
I don't know Dan Quayle personally, so I can't make any kind of assessment, but here they come now, Mrs. Quayle. Mrs. Quayle is coming down. In that he never gets traction. He lacks the gravity. I don't know why that is. I'm not a psychologist, just an observer, but he doesn't ever lock on to his opportunities. And he floats to the top, he doesn't rise to the top. There's just something missing there that may inhibit him. But, you know, the last person who predicted what would happen to a vice president was a colleague of ours back in the 60s who said Richard Nixon is finished. Mm-hmm. He said it a second time after Nixon lost the gubernatorial race in California in 1962. He said it a third time. We now know what happened to Nixon, and I cannot even remember the name of our colleague who predicted what was going to happen to Richard Nixon.
I'm sure he's very grateful.
But wouldn't Jack Kemp virtually metaphorically use brass knuckles on Dan Quayle if he, Dan Quayle, looked like he was any threat to Kemp getting the party nomination in '95?
Well, that's all Republicans will be wearing, tight smiles and brass knuckles for the next 4 years. But, you know, this whole discussion, when I read it in the paper and everywhere, sort of is off-putting to me, who would have said 4 years ago that the man you're looking at right now would be the likely nominee of the Democratic Party and the next President of the United States?
You're quite right.
People watched him at that convention where he spoke on and on and on and on and got the biggest applause. Yet look at that.
Look at this.
The moving in.
A moving van with Arkansas tags. I bet that driver is glad to pull up to the White House.
You remember that?
Backing in gingerly.
Remember that sad picture of the Kennedy rocker being taken out of the White House after his assassination and before Johnson went in? This is a much better picture. A moving van.
Did you just hear that? George Bush patted a military fellow on the shoulder and said, "See ya." Always outgoing, always writing notes, always having something good to say to familiar faces, always making phone calls. Dan Quayle doesn't look too cheerful right now.
And in fact, what you were saying earlier, who could have imagined 4 years ago when we were talking about something that most people thought of as a very likely 8-year administration of George Bush, that it would end this way today?
Senator Stevens of Alaska right behind President Bush, and Bob Michel of the House of Representatives, the Republican leader from the House, behind Mr. Quayle.
It's much better to be a reporter than a prophet. You have a longer career when you're wrong.
Vice President-elect Al Gore, Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell of Maine, they're all wending their way quickly because they are behind schedule. And no matter who is not in place, we know what's going to happen at 11:59 going to 12. That was the last time George Bush, as President of the United States, will hear "Hail to the Chief." Bill Clinton's face reflecting the deep thoughts in this man's mind. A long road from Hope, Arkansas. You could see his jaw tightening just a little bit. There's a lot on his mind. No doubt thinking about the speech he will deliver, a relatively brief one. And as he indicated in that interview with Wolf Blitzer, he's thinking about the people. He does not want to lose touch with the people. He told the governors he wants them to call him. And when Wolf challenged him a little bit and said, well, how you're going to be surrounded? How are you going to stay in touch? And he indicated that he intends to do that because he believes that's very important to his strength as a leader.
Well, Washington will change him, Bernie, in a short matter of time. He's going to have to learn that he can't take every call, can't shake every hand, and can't see every person. I was at a ceremony this morning where he didn't leave until 12:45.
12:45 this morning?
Yeah. And he was back at 8 o'clock at another one. I mean, and he wanted to shake every hand and see every face. But it's his moment. Let him have it.
Indeed. He's worked hard enough for it. Wherever you are watching in the world, CNN is bringing you live coverage of the inauguration.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect, William Jefferson Clinton.
Can you hear me, Bob? My apology to you if you heard me shouting to Bob Fernand, our senior executive producer. Can you hear me, Bob? There's a lot going on. But Bill and Mike, this is a great time to talk about the change of generations.
I just was thinking how totally unpredictable, porous, volatile, and remarkable American politics is.
Vice President, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, former President and Mrs. Carter, President-elect Clinton and Vice President-elect Gore, my colleagues and guests, welcome to the 1993 presidential inauguration. Today, our nation bids a gracious goodbye to an outgoing administration and warmly welcomes in a new one as William Jefferson Clinton takes office as the 42nd President of the United States. This peaceful and orderly transfer of power that we will soon witness is a remarkable tribute to the genius of the Constitution and the enduring strength of our political system and our proud national heritage. Indeed, the eyes of the nation and the world are on us now as we prepare to inaugurate William Jefferson Clinton as President and Albert Gore Jr. as Vice President of these United States. So President Bush, President-elect Clinton, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as he has been called upon before, we now ask the Reverend Billy Graham to lead our nation in prayer. Reverend Graham.
Shall we pray? Our God and our Father, we thank you for this historic occasion when we inaugurate our new president and vice president. We thank you for the moral and spiritual foundations which our forefathers gave us and which are rooted deeply in Holy Scripture. Those principles have nourished and guided us as a nation in the past. But we cannot say that we're a righteous people, for we are not. We've sinned against you. We've sown to the wind and are now reaping the whirlwind of crime, drug abuse, racism, immorality, and social injustice. We need to repent of our sins and turn by faith to you. And now on this 20th day of January, 1993, we commit to you President-elect Clinton and Vice President-elect Gore, whom you have permitted to take leadership at this critical time in our nation's history. Help them always to see the office to which they've been elected as a sacred trust from you. We pray that you will bless their wives, who will share so much of the responsibility and burdens. May President-elect Clinton know that he is never really alone, but that the eternal God can be his refuge, and he can turn to you in every circumstance. Give him the wisdom you have promised to those who ask, and the strength you alone can give. We thank you for his predecessor, President Bush, and the dedication he gave to this office. Bless him as he and Mrs. Bush continue their dedicated service to our country in other spheres. We commit this inaugural ceremony to you and ask that the memory of this event may always remind us to pray for our leaders. I pray this in the name of the one who was called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, and the Prince of Peace. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to present the Philander Smith Collegiate Choir from Little Rock, Arkansas. The choir, under the direction of Stephen L. Hayes, will perform City on the Hill, composed by Dr. Marvin V. Curtis.
Just in the royalty and the
Ladies and gentlemen, I now present Justice Byron White, who will administer the vice presidential oath of office to Albert Gore, Jr.
Senator, you will raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Albert Gore, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Albert Gore, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully perform.
That I will well and faithfully perform.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
And I know you will, Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Justice.
Bernie, you know, watching these two young men, the first president younger than I am, I keep thinking that you asked a question about the generational and the change in American politics. Just 4 years ago, we had a president who was born in Ronald Reagan, a president who was born before World War I. Bill Clinton is about to become president and was born after World War II. A remarkable change in generationally in just 4 years.
Very remarkable.
Best-known sopranos participating in today's ceremony, who will perform an American medley that includes Simple Gifts by Aaron Copland and Make a Rainbow by Portia Nelson. From the Metropolitan Opera, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marilyn Horne.
Tis the gift to be free, tis the gift
Mike and Bill, notwithstanding the pomp, the circumstance, the Marine Band playing here, bright sun, crisp temperatures, everyone feeling good about the country, there is the reality of security. And I was thinking, as we saw the camera shot of President-elect Clinton listening very appreciatively to Marilyn Horne singing, but he was behind bulletproof glass.
And the first president to take the oath of office, the first man to take the oath of office, there it is, behind that bulletproof glass was Lyndon Johnson in 1965, because we still lived with the reverberations, including fear and dread that it might happen again. I've seen Washington really change, Bernie and Michael, over the years because of this security. Coming here this morning, caught in that traffic, I've learned to recognize the plainclothesman and the guy with the rifle stashed under his car. They're everywhere.
That's for sure, and I think that redoubles Bill Clinton's intention to make sure that he doesn't allow these cordons of security to separate him from the people. You know, we were talking about that earlier, the new president's intention to make sure that he does not get separated. In a way, it may be seen in the future that he is learning the lesson of the last war. His campaign in 1992 was largely a critique of George Bush for having gotten out of touch. And as Bill suggested earlier, it may well turn out to be that Bill Clinton's efforts to remain in touch with the American people, with those in Washington, in the end, act to his detriment.
As you watch CNN's coverage around the world of this inauguration, if you're keeping minute check on what's happening, the Marine Band is playing a little bit beyond schedule because they want to do this precisely on time. At 11:58 Eastern Time, Justice William Rehnquist, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, will be introduced, and then he will, of course, administer the oath to the President-elect. Wolf Blitzer is not too far from Mr. Clinton.
Bernie, I'm sitting about 20 feet away behind the leather chairs where the new president is sitting, and Vice President Gore, he already is vice president. We now see Senator Ford of Kentucky come back to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Justice of the United States, who will administer the presidential oath of office to William Jefferson Clinton. Chief Justice.
Governor, are you ready to take the oath?
I am.
Will you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will to the best of my ability.
And will to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
not a handshake between George Bush and Bill Clinton before. Now there is one. This is a tradition, and in recent years, many times incoming presidents have a word of thanks for their predecessor in their inaugural address.
My fellow citizens, today we celebrate the mystery of American renewal. This ceremony is held in the depth of winter, but by the words we speak and the faces we show the world, we force the spring. A spring reborn in the world's oldest democracy that brings forth the vision and courage to reinvent America. When our founders boldly declared America's independence to the world and our purposes to the Almighty, they knew that America, to endure, would have to change. Not change for change's sake, but change to preserve America's ideals: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Though we march to the music of our time, our mission is timeless. Each generation of Americans must define what it means to be an American. On behalf of our nation, I salute my predecessor, President Bush, for his half-century of service to America. And I thank the millions of men and women whose steadfastness and sacrifice triumphed over depression, fascism, and communism. Today, a generation raised in the shadows of the Cold War assumes new responsibilities in a world warmed by the sunshine of freedom, but threatened still by ancient hatreds and new plagues. Raised in unrivaled prosperity, we inherit an economy that is still the world's strongest, but is weakened by business failures, stagnant wages, increasing inequality, and deep divisions among our own people. When George Washington first took the oath I have just sworn to uphold, news traveled slowly across the land by horseback and across the ocean by boat. Now the sights and sounds of this ceremony are broadcast instantaneously to billions around the world. Communications and commerce are global. Investment is mobile. Technology is almost magical. And ambition for a better life is now universal. We earn our livelihood in America today in peaceful competition with people all across the earth. Profound and powerful forces are shaking and remaking our world. And the urgent question of our time is whether we can make change our friend and not our enemy. This new world has already enriched the lives of millions of Americans who are able to compete and win in it. But when most people are working harder for less, when others cannot work at all, when the cost of health care devastates families and threatens to bankrupt our enterprises great and small, when the fear of crime robs law-abiding citizens of their freedom, and when millions of poor children cannot even imagine the lives we are calling them to lead, we have not made change our friend. We know we have to face hard truths and take strong steps, but we have not done so. Instead, we have drifted. And that drifting has eroded our resources, fractured our economy, and shaken our confidence. Though our challenges are fearsome, so are our strengths. Americans have ever been a restless, questing, hopeful people. And we must bring to our task today the vision and will of those who came before us. From our revolution to the Civil War, to the Great Depression, to the Civil Rights Movement, our people have always mustered the determination to construct from these crises the pillars of our history. Thomas Jefferson believed that to preserve the very foundations of our nation, we would need dramatic change from time to time. Well, my fellow Americans, this is our time. Let us embrace it. Our democracy must be not only the envy of the world, but the engine of our own renewal. There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America. And so today we pledge an end to the era of deadlock and drift, and a new season of American renewal has begun. To renew America, we must be bold. We must do what no generation has had to do before. We must invest more in our own people, in their jobs, and in their future, and at the same time, cut our massive debt. And we must do so in a world in which we must compete for every opportunity. It will not be easy. It will require sacrifice. But it can be done, and done fairly. Not choosing sacrifice for its own sake, but for our own sake. We must provide for our nation the way a family provides for its children. Our founders saw themselves in the light of posterity. We can do no less. Anyone who has ever watched a child's eyes wander into sleep knows what posterity is. Posterity is the world to come, the world for whom we hold our ideals, from whom we have borrowed our planet, and to whom we bear sacred responsibility. We must do what America does best, offer more opportunity to all, and demand more responsibility from all. It is time to break the bad habit of expecting something for nothing from our government or from each other. Let us all take more responsibilities, not only for ourselves and our families, but for our communities and our country. To renew America, we must revitalize our democracy. This beautiful capital, like every capital since the dawn of civilization, is often a place of intrigue and calculation. Powerful people maneuver for position and worry endlessly about who is in and who is out, who is up and who is down, forgetting those people whose toil and sweat sends us here and pays our way. Americans deserve better. And in this city today, there are people who want to do better. And so I say to all of you here, let us resolve to reform our politics so that power and privilege no longer shout down the voice of the people. Let us put aside personal advantage so that we can feel the pain and see the promise of America. Let us resolve to make our government a place for what Franklin Roosevelt called bold, persistent experimentation, a government for our tomorrows, not our yesterdays. Let us give this capital back to the people to whom it belongs. To renew America, we must meet challenges abroad as well as at home. There is no longer a clear division between what is foreign and what is domestic. The world economy, the world environment, the world AIDS crisis, the world arms race, they affect us all. Today, as an old order passes, the new world is more free but less stable. Communism's collapse has called forth old animosities and new dangers. Clearly, America must continue to lead the world we did so much to make. While America rebuilds at home, we will not shrink from the challenges nor fail to seize the opportunities of this new world. Together with our friends and allies, we will work to shape change lest it engulf us. When our vital interests are challenged or the will and conscience of the international community is defied, we will act. With peaceful diplomacy whenever possible, with force when necessary. The brave Americans serving our nation today in the Persian Gulf, in Somalia, and wherever else they stand are testament to our resolve. But our greatest strength is the power of our ideas, which are still new in many lands. Across the world, we see them embraced and we rejoice. Our hopes, our hearts, our hands are with those on every continent who are building democracy and freedom. Their cause is America's cause. The American people have summoned the change we celebrate today. You have raised your voices in an unmistakable chorus. You have cast your votes in historic numbers, and you have changed the face of Congress, the presidency, and the political process itself. Yes, you, my fellow Americans, have forced the spring. Now we must do the work the season demands. To that work I now turn with all the authority of my office. I ask the Congress to join with me. But no president, no Congress, no government can undertake this mission alone. My fellow Americans, you too must play your part in our renewal. I challenge a new generation of young Americans to a season of service, to act on your idealism by helping troubled children, keeping company with those in need, reconnecting our torn communities. There is so much to be done. Enough indeed for millions of others who are still young in spirit to give of themselves in service too. In serving, we recognize a simple but powerful truth. We need each other, and we must care for one another. Today, we do more than celebrate America. We rededicate ourselves to the very idea of America. An idea born in revolution and renewed through 2 centuries of challenge. An idea tempered by the knowledge that but for fate, we, the fortunate and the unfortunate, might have been each other. An idea ennobled by the faith that our nation can summon from its myriad diversity the deepest measure of unity. An idea infused with the conviction that America's long, heroic journey must go forever upward. And so, my fellow Americans, as we stand at the edge of the 21st century, let us begin anew with energy and hope, with faith and discipline, and let us work until our work is done. The Scripture says, and let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. From this joyful mountaintop of celebration, we hear a call to service in the valley. We have heard the trumpets. We have changed the guard. And now, each in our own way, and with God's help, we must answer the call. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Shortly after the November election, President Clinton asked noted educator, historian, and author Dr. Maya Angelou to compose a poem for this historic day. From Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Wake Forest University, please welcome Dr. Angelou.
Mr. President and Mrs. Clinton, Mr. Vice President and Mrs. Gore, and Americans everywhere. A rock, a river, a tree, hosts to species long since departed, marked the mastodon, the dinosaur, who left dry tokens of their sojourn here on our planet floor. Any broad alarm of their hastening doom is lost in the gloom of dust and ages. But today, the rock cries out to us, clearly, forcefully, "Come, you may stand upon my back and face your distant destiny, but seek no haven in my shadow. I will give you no hiding place down here. You, created only a little lower than the angels, have crouched too long in the bruising darkness, have lain too long face down in ignorance, your mouths spilling words armed for slaughter. The rock cries out to us today, you may stand upon me, but do not hide your face. Across the wall of the world, a river sings a beautiful song. It says, come, rest here by my side. Each of you, a bordered country, delicate and strangely made, proud, yet thrusting perpetually under siege. Your armed struggles for profit have left collars of waste upon my shore, currents of debris upon my breast. Yet today, I call you to my riverside, if you will study war no more. Come, clad in peace, and I will sing the songs the Creator gave to me when I and the tree and the rock were one. Before cynicism was a bloody sear across your brow, and when you yet knew, you still knew nothing. The river sang and sings on. There is a true yearning to respond to the singing river and the wise rock. So say the Asian, the Hispanic, the Jew, the African, the Native American, the Sioux, the Catholic, the Muslim, the French, the Greek, the Irish, the rabbi, the priest, the sheik, the gay, the straight, the preacher, the privileged, the homeless, the teacher. They all hear the speaking of the tree. They hear the first and last of every tree speak to humankind today. Come to me, here beside the river. Plant yourself beside the river. Each of you, descendant of some passed-on traveler, has been paid for. You who gave me my first name, you Pawnee, Apache, Seneca, you Cherokee Nation, who rested with me, then forced on bloody feet, left me to the employment of other seekers, desperate for gain, starving for gold. You the Turk, the Arab, the Swede, the German, the Eskimo, the Scot, you the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Kru, bought, sold, stolen, arriving on a nightmare, praying for a dream. Here, root yourselves beside me. I am that tree planted by the river which will not be moved. I the rock, I the river, I the tree, I am yours. Your passages have been paid. Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for this bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the shape of your most private need. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for new beginnings. Do not be wedded forever to fear, yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering you space to place new steps of change. Here, on the pulse of this fine day, you may have the courage to look up and out and upon me, the rock, the river, the tree, your country. No less to Midas than the mendicant, no less to you now than the mastodon then. Here, on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply, with hope, good morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the 1993 presidential inauguration. As soon as the ceremony is over, my colleague on the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies, the distinguished Senator from Alaska, Ted Stevens, will form the presidential escort to the east front of the Capitol. To conclude our program now, please rise for the benediction by Reverend Billy Graham and remain standing for the singing of our national anthem by Marilyn Horne. Reverend Graham.
Our Father, we pray that as we come to the end of this ceremony, that we will long remember the challenges that we have heard. And we dedicate ourselves to do everything in our power to keep those challenges and to dedicate ourselves anew, not only to you, but to America and all the great ideals that we stand for. We pray again that thou wouldst bless the President and the Vice President as they lead us in the years to come. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up his countenance upon us and give us peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Well, in past inauguration speeches, one is mindful of 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." John Kennedy, 1961, "The torch has been passed to a new generation." Mike Beschloss, Bill Moyers?
Well, it's a serviceable speech. It's a speech that will warm the hearts of his friends without chilling the hearts of his enemies, because there was nothing in there that was aggressive and assertive and likely to throw fear into the hearts of the Republicans or his opposition. It's a curious element Michael and I were talking about, that he just got up and seemed to leap right into it without establishing a bond between him and the people or him and the words.
Yes, and it makes you wonder whether it might not have been a great idea to speak so much in public over the last 3 days. You know, a lot of this is an incoming president trying to fill both roles. One thing an inaugural speech does is establishes a new president in the role almost of monarch, and that's a unifying role. A new president also has to, needless to say, propose programs almost like a prime minister that tend to divide. This is a speech that almost entirely was Bill Clinton in the role of unifying chief of state, not head of government.
Wolf Blitzer is there, not too far from this 42nd president of the United States. Wolf?
That's right, Bernie. I can see him walking up the stairs right about 30 or 40 feet away, clearly smiling with his family. I thought that the major themes that he enunciated during the campaign, certainly during the transition, came through very forcefully during this approximately 15-minute speech. Themes involving change, especially a new generation taking over here in the United States. As far as the international situation is concerned, I also noted with some interest that when he was defining exactly when the United States and his administration might be willing to use military force, he didn't simply stop after asserting that the U.S. would do so after its vital interests were endangered. He then went on to say, not only citing vital interests, but also if the will and the conscience of the international community is defied. Clearly, based on what he told me in that interview last week and what his aides have been saying, that seemed to be a reference to ethnic cleansing in the former Yugoslavia in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And to a certain degree, he is underscoring now a new international policy that his administration will adopt in trying to project U.S. military force. On some of the domestic economic issues, he restated, of course, his desire to create jobs, to improve the health care, to combat AIDS, all at the same time trying to cut the U.S. budget deficit, goals that he enunciated so forcefully during the campaign. He didn't get into very many specifics. This was a speech that was clearly designed to simply set a theme, an objective, a tone for his administration. He wanted to get on with it, and he certainly did. Bernie?
Thank you, Wolf. Before we go to our senior Washington correspondent, Charles Bierbauer, let's take you down Pennsylvania Avenue along the parade route near the reviewing stand. Carl Rochelle has been talking with some people who listened to President Clinton's speech.
Bernie, listening to the speech along with us here in Lafayette Park, right across from the White House, Julia Reeser, who is originally from Oklahoma, lives in the Washington area now, is in the U.S. Navy, and her children, Lucy, who is 10, and Joel, who is 11. Julia, I'd like to ask you, what do you think of the speech?
Well, it was over pretty quickly. I was expecting a long speech, but he said a lot in those few minutes.
Any optimism from you?
It feels good to be an American again. I mean, there's times when, especially since I just come back from overseas, where it seems like everybody's bad-mouthing Americans, but I feel hope and inspiration from his speech.
Being in the Navy, do you see a change between President Bush and President Clinton?
I don't think so, and especially right now at this time with Iraq and Somalia and that, I think he'll probably carry on the way President Bush did. I don't see any major changes.
Lucy, is this your first inauguration?
Yeah.
What did you think of the speech of Mr. Clinton?
Well, it was good. It was a nice speech. He talked about, like, a lot of children and how to save children and, like, about Somalia and stuff like that.
Joel, is this something you will want to tell your family and friends about?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
What did it mean to you? Any warmth, any feeling from it?
Yeah, I was inspired by it, yes, I was. Yeah.
Any particular feelings?
Well, I felt like there was going to be a change.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Good to talk to you. The Reeser family from Rockville, Maryland, originally from Oklahoma. Bernie?
Thank you, Carl Rochelle in Lafayette Park. Well, our local cable operators, who together with CNN are bringing you this special coverage of the inauguration, will pause for some commercial messages, and we will be right back. There's a lot more.
Destiny can still throw you a curve.
It was meant to be.
Mr. Destiny.
Are you an angel or something?
In the middle of your screen, President Clinton and former President George Bush. They are escorting the party through the rotunda. Mr. Bush soon will be coming out on the East Plaza. It took the 42nd President of the United States 14 snappy minutes to deliver his address. Outside in the west front of the Capitol, our senior Washington correspondent, Charles Bierbauer.
Bertie, in those 14 minutes, there were perhaps half a dozen key words that seemed to summarize this speech. I jotted them down. Renewal was, of course, the recurrent word in Mr. Clinton's address here. Change, not surprisingly, and specifically dramatic change is what he called for. He spoke of deadlock and drift. Whether he wanted to or not, George Bush...
The right foot, or will people forget about it in a few days?
Well, I don't know how long people remember anybody's speeches until you all decide whether or not they should. I'm not being facetious. Yeah. Until you all decide whether or not they should remember them by repeating them constantly. I think the theme that he has hit from the day he began to campaign, a theme of inclusion and a theme of shared responsibility, is what he said today. And I think that will be remembered. And I do really think this is, in fact, an entire new generation that is taking over the reins of this country. It is more fun as a generation born out of a completely different life experience than the leaders that we've had in this country up to this very moment. This is the first president that was born during or after World War II.
Well, when I asked you if this speech was going to propel him, I was remembering the speech that President Kennedy made, the inaugural speech that he made, that clearly generated a great deal of goodwill and got him off on the right foot. A lot of memorable lines from that speech. Is this that kind of a speech? Was he trying to achieve that?
I think he was trying to achieve, it seemed to me, he was trying to achieve more of a clear, coherent message of what his campaign was about and what he wants his presidency to be about. There are there are few speeches that have lines like "ask not what you can do" and "a new generation is born." I mean, it was not that kind of speech. It was a message content speech, consistent, it seems to me, with everything that he stands for and what he hopes the country will stand for.
Senator Biden, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your time. Back to you, Bernie.
Thank you, Wolf. You know, in his vernacular, George Bush might say he's getting ready to get out of Dodge. Michael Beschloss and Bill Moyers, the Clintons standing here, they bade farewell to the Bushes.
This is a rather new development, this ceremony that we're seeing here. It used to be that an outgoing president would really just slip away by car. Dwight Eisenhower, for instance, in 1961, went to a luncheon at the F Street Club here in Washington. Really no ceremony. This kind of ceremony, really, we first saw 4 years ago, where George Bush and Barbara Bush were standing in exactly the same place that we're seeing the Clintons. They were bidding farewell to the Reagans. Now you see the same scene in, needless to say, a very different political context. In this context, it is a quite civilized ceremony because you have two candidates who were bitterly opposed to one another last year, bidding farewell to each other in an atmosphere of some harmony.
I've always wished that I could apply some kind of device to the synapses of the brain of the outgoing president to just record, for you, Michael, the historians, rather than for us journalists who want to make mincemeat of it right now, what's going through the mind. It must be both a combination of melancholy and relief. I don't have to go read that summary report from Iraq at 4 o'clock. I go down to the Situation Room and have that meeting.
Going back to the chopper we were looking at, there is a change in the designation of the nomenclature of this ceremony. That chopper is normally known as Marine One. The moment former President Bush got aboard the chopper, it ceased being Marine One. It is now called Nighthawk One. Charles Bierbauer, when Nighthawk One goes to Andrews Air Force Base, former President Bush will be getting on what we know to be Air Force One, but today it will be called SAM 2800. It'll take the Bushes down to Houston. When it comes back, it will be Air Force One. And when this chopper comes back to its hangar, it will be Marine One.
Well, almost, Bernie. Just to be precise on that, it is Marine One and Air Force One only when the President of the United States is on board. And that is, of course, now Bill Clinton. So the chopper that's going to take the President to Andrews Air Force Base is not Marine One anymore. That's purely a presidential designation. It could be any chopper in the world that he happens to be on. And SAM 28,000 is Special Air Mission. That's what that stands for. It's on the special mission to take the ex-president, former President Bush, down to Houston. And when it returns and when it picks up Bill Clinton for his first flight as President of the United States, then it'll be Air Force One. Bernie?
Without taking anything away from the poignancy of this moment, though, there is a real element that needs to be considered here. I see all these helicopters, all these limousines, all this support that goes into the presidency, and I read a story the other day that it now takes between $1 and $1.5 billion a year to support the presidency. $1 to $1.5 billion a year. I mean, somehow, someday, sooner or later, we have to bring this back to some realm of moderation.
And it really comes back to this great conflict, because Americans, as Bill and I were talking about a little bit earlier, have this enormous need to invest great emotion in their president, to see him almost as a regal figure, a father figure, and at the same time they expect him to be a very effective political leader. Presidents not unintelligently understand that this is very serviceable to them in terms of developing a great deal of support that can help them pass their programs. It's almost like asking a president to take a vow. It's the kind of thing Ross Perot talked about.
President and Mrs. Clinton are going to lunch inside the Capitol. Former President George Bush and Mrs. Bush are going to Andrews Air Force Base for the flight to Houston, Texas. When we come back, we'll take you to Andrews Air Force Base for the final farewell on the part of the Bushes. A new captain and crew at the helm. Washington on this day crowned with a bright winter sun as William Jefferson Clinton took the oath and with a shorter than expected speech set the new course. President Clinton saying a new season of American renewal has begun. He said change and reforms ahead will not be easy and will require sacrifice. He promised to reform politics, quote, so that power and privilege can no longer shout down the voice of the people. From this joyful mountaintop of celebration, said President Clinton, we hear a call to service in the valley. George Bush now is a former president. Leaving the White House, he served for the past 12 years in his own and the Reagan administrations. He flies home to Houston with a group of his closest advisors by his side. For the President and Vice President Gore, a lunch with congressional leaders in the Capitol's Statuary Hall. President Clinton and his family soon go back down the hill, and they take formal and personal possession of their new home. The moving van arrived at the White House just as former President Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush left. President Clinton now is preparing to sign 4 documents: the Executive Order on Ethics, the proclamation naming January 22nd National Day of Fellowship, a nomination for 19 cabinet posts, and the 4th group of documents, the nomination for sub-cabinet positions. Incidentally, senators on Capitol Hill are set to meet later this afternoon to confirm Mr. Clinton's Defense Secretary Les Aspin. And as you heard, CNN's Pentagon correspondent Jamie McIntyre report earlier in our live coverage, Dick Cheney has been extended as Defense Secretary until this matter is cleared up and his successor has been designated. So far, it's been a whirlwind day, Bill and Mike.
It certainly has, and that's the solemn, ritual, business-like nature of this affair. It's been show business up until now, entertainers everywhere, celebrities, hoopla, but this is the business part of this is really what it's all about, frankly, and what often gets detached from our concerns and moved to the margin. I mean, governing, making things happen, making decisions.
And what we're also seeing is a ritual with great political impact. Bill Clinton is signing those 4 documents, intending to send a message about what was most important to him in the first few minutes of his presidency, or at least things that were among the most important. John Kennedy, for instance, in 1961 of this moment, signed a document improving the minimum wage. Ronald Reagan in 1981 signed a similar document that authorized a hiring freeze in the executive branch. Historians later on will look back on what a president does through these first few minutes. It sends a signal.
Mr. Clinton is left-handed. The last 3 presidents of the United States have been southpaws.
He's also tall. The last 3 presidents, including him, have been tall. Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Bill Clinton. I noticed a moment ago that Bill Clinton is actually slightly taller than George Bush.
And he is also standing at this moment talking to Senator Alan Simpson and Senator Robert Dole. Simpson, probably George Bush's closest friend in the Senate. Robert Dole, George Bush's chief political adversary in 1988.
The first message he signed was about ethics, Michael and Bernie, and that sends the message that he is attempting to send the signal that this is going to be a cleaner, straighter administration than the past one. But there is a contradiction buried right within the Clinton administration, because he has put in 2 key positions the men who raised the most money for him in his presidential race. He's put Rahm Emanuel, the campaign finance director, as the White House political affairs director. A strange mixture there. Is this young man's job to see that the decisions that the president makes bring money to the coffers, to the campaign? And he's put Ron Brown, a lawyer, lobbyist, fixer, at the Commerce Department, also in a key position to make decisions affecting contracts and government. So there is a built-in contradiction there.
We are seeing the helicopter with the Bushes on board, having landed at Andrews Air Force Base in suburban Maryland, taxiing up, and they will be coming out very shortly.
And you know, it might be said, Bernie, that in 1969, when Lyndon Johnson went to Andrews Air Force Base and left for Texas after leaving the presidency, one of those who went out to Andrews to see him off was Congressman George Bush, Republican of Texas. Part of it was, I think, a gesture of sentiment and respect. Part of it was politics. Bush was planning to run for the Senate the next year in Texas. He knew that it would not hurt to have LBJ, at least to some extent, kindly to him.
Mary Tillotson is at Andrews.
Bernie, I think we all know that this is not the way President Bush would have preferred to leave Washington. After 12 years at the head of the Republican executive branch, first as vice president, of course, then as president, he had been hoping to make this final last trip to Andrews for a departure 4 years into the future after a successful second term. But this, of course, is a departure in defeat, and because of that, it's going to be somewhat subdued. Until only a couple of days ago, there had been plans for Mr. Bush to say goodbye to this city with a 21-gun salute and a full military review, much pomp and circumstance. A couple of days ago, the president then told his staff that this was to be Bill Clinton's day in the sun, and he wanted to scale back those plans. It is going to be a much simpler affair. We're going to see the president and his wife get off this helicopter, walk past many of the ground crew members at Andrews, go through a cordon of 20 servicemen here at Andrews, and then up the stairs of what would have been called Air Force One if he were still president. As you were talking about a few minutes ago, Bernie, this is the 747 that is part of the team of jumbo jets here at Andrews that are accorded the designation Air Force One, but only when the sitting president is aboard. As of about an hour now, since Bill Clinton's swearing in, Mr. Bush no longer holds that title, and so the plane on which he rides no longer holds the automatic designation Air Force One. There's Mrs. Bush in her coat. Most of the people here in the audience, by the way, and there are several hundred of them, closest are White House staffers, some cabinet members like Jack Kemp. Most of them are supporters of the president, not, as Michael Beschloss was talking about, any prominent Democrats, at least none that I've seen. Bernie?
Thank you, Mary Tillotson at Andrews. And as the Bushes wave farewell, Wolf Blitzer is still at it on Capitol Hill. Wolf?
Bernie, a few moments ago, we had some Democratic reaction from the Senate, Senator Biden. Now for some Republican reaction, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. Thanks, Senator, for joining us.
Glad to be here with you.
Was this the kind of speech you expected from President Clinton?
It really was. It was an eloquent speech. He paid tribute to President Bush at the beginning and then made it clear why he was elected, and I think is still continuing the process of effectuating change. So I was very interested in it.
He did pay tribute to President Bush, but then he went on to criticize a lot of those policies, at least indirectly. Do you think President Bush, a Republican like that, would have felt uncomfortable listening to Clinton's remarks, the generational change, all of the other economic changes he was proposing?
Well, George Bush is a real professional. He's worked for, like he said, a half century in the public interest, and he's going to understand that this is his day, President Clinton's day. It's his right to be able to refer to whatever he wants to, and frankly, he gave a very good speech. I thought there were some interesting parts of it. For instance, the very interesting parts, for instance, the part about our vital interests and international interests. I thought that was an interesting play on words that may have great meaning to the international community, and I'm not really sure what he meant, but I think I know.
Well, do you think that President Bush's policy of making sure the U.S. got involved militarily only when vital interests were at stake, certainly that was compromised a bit in Somalia, but will President Clinton go further in projecting U.S. military power?
Well, in all honesty, vital interests were at stake in Somalia, too, but President Clinton looks as though he's going to go beyond that and look at international interests as well. Now, I think President Bush did that as well, but it always involved vital interests of the United States. I was particularly impressed with the poem. I thought Maya Angelou did a tremendous job on that poem. It was a very descriptive poem, and I think President Clinton has to be very proud of her and very pleased with what she did.
President Bush is now leaving Washington. He's at Andrews Air Force Base, and we're showing some pictures over there. You've met recently with President Bush. What's his mood as he goes through this transition and about to embark on a new life?
Well, he's a real wonderful man, as you know, and he understands the American people made a choice here, and he accepts that choice, and I think he wants to make a very abundant and full life the rest of his life. He's still a little irritated with the way he was treated by the press, and I think justly so. But on the other hand, he's getting a big kick out of life. He's going to make his life a very important one. And with Barbara, I think they're going to still be examples to all of us, no matter what has happened here.
Is he? You know, there were initial reports that he was sort of despondent and depressed. Is that your sense as he leaves Washington?
No, I chatted with him. I've chatted with him at least 3 or 4 times in the last week, a couple of weeks. And I have to say that he's very upbeat. He's very positive about his life and his future. I think he gets a little irritated with the independent counsel and the continuation of that fiasco. It's been going on for 7 years now. And like I say, he's been a little disappointed in some other aspects, but he's very positive. He said he can handle all problems, and he's going to do it.
Well, he was real rigorous these last few weeks with Somalia, deploying troops there, with Saddam Hussein. Were you surprised that these last hours of his administration he was getting so directly involved in U.S. military power?
I think George Bush is going to go down in history as one of the great presidents. I don't think there's any question about it. He was a forceful leader. He did a very good job, certainly internationally, and I think if you really look at the domestic record with the Congress that he had, he did a very good job there as well. And he worked right up to the last second of the last day. I've got to give him credit. I've never seen a president do that before, and he handled some very, very difficult problems, which are now going to be President Clinton's. They're very difficult, and as you know, in some respects, the world is less stable today than it was when it had 2 great powers that seemed to square off against each other. I'm worried about what's going to happen, and I have a kind of a theory about President Clinton. I think he's a very bright guy. I think that he may turn out to be a very great president if he can start working on the deficit of this country and, of course, work to bring people together and bind up the wounds of the country. And I'm hoping he'll do that. And if he will, he'll have a lot of support from this senator.
Senator Hatch, thank you very much for joining us. Bernie, back to you.
Thank you, Wolf. Bill Moyers, the first time the Bushes walked up the stairs to board that plane, Air Force One, was September 1990. Going to Helsinki for that famous one-day summit conference.
There's not much a president can do about how history judges his term, his administration. Forces, larger economic forces, international forces, the success or failure of Bill Clinton, all of those factors determine how ultimately 50, 60 years from now, 100 years from now, the Bush governance holds up. But there's a lot a president can do, an ex-president can do, to refurbish his own personal image. And look at Jimmy Carter, whose term in office was not a very successful one, as historians count it, but who's now one of the more popular ex-presidents in history. Gerald Ford, unlike Jimmy Carter, went out and played golf, made speeches for a fee, didn't get involved in any kind of serious civic work, and he's forgotten. He's a footnote. He's almost a forgotten joke. So what happens to George Bush in our present, and contemporary, and future esteem depends a lot upon what he does with all this free time and privilege that have accrued to him as a result of his time in government.
As we're speaking, we're watching the head of Speaker of the House, Tom Foley, President Clinton. He's in Statuary Hall, seeing a lot of bright, applauding people. One face I've been searching for all morning long, and especially at Andrews Air Force Base, I can't find. Where is James Baker?
He has been the missing man of Washington since that election. He's out negotiating, they say, for a book contract that is not going, those negotiations are not going too well because his marketability has dropped so substantially. But
I've heard he wants $1 million.
Well, so would I like $1 million. But he has been the star eclipsed in all of this. He left reluctantly the State Department as Secretary of State to come and manage George Bush's campaign. The campaign was a failure, and James Baker was hurt by that.
One of the last faces I saw in that line receiving Mr. and Mrs. Bush was that of Jack Kemp. It's interesting. Yeah, off and running, and we see Dan Quayle there in the tarmac, and back here in the hall in the Capitol, the Clintons are coming in for luncheon. And of course, after the luncheon, they go down Pennsylvania Avenue. They'll duck into the White House briefly, come back out, stand in the presidential reviewing platform, and watch the parade.
There, right there, at the lower part of the screen is former Senator Albert Gore, Albert Gore's father, who was himself a member of Congress and a senator. What a proud moment this is for him.
Ask and we shall receive. I was wondering, where is James Baker? Charles Bierbauer?
Well, James Baker, the Chief of Staff, the former Secretary of the State, is supposed to be boarding that plane, or may already be on board the President's plane heading back to Houston. Mr. Baker is himself from Houston, but you're absolutely right. Mr. Baker has maintained the lowest of profiles since leaving the State Department and going over to the White House, purportedly to help Mr. Bush rescue his re-election campaign. That did not happen. The other reason we're not seeing much of Mr. Baker these days is because there is a lingering potential law problem, legal problem, arising over the investigation of Bill Clinton's passport records, which involved some of the Bush administration people and at least one person on Mr. Baker's staff. He has, as we know, retained a criminal lawyer, as have a couple of other people, and that's a primary reason why Mr. Baker is not being seen and certainly not being heard from much these days. Bernie?
Thank you, Charles. God, we thank thee for this beautiful day that you have brought, and the sun to shine upon this occasion. We pray that it's only a foretaste of that which is to come. We pray for all of those that take office in the days ahead and those that have just taken office. Now we thank you for this food. Bless it to the nourishment of our bodies, we pray thee, and us to thy service. In Christ's name, amen.
Please be seated. At this point, they're going to turn off the television lights so these fine people can eat undisturbed. Incidentally, the Reverend Dr. Billy Graham will be Larry King's guest on special editions of Larry King Live. You can hear the live interview with Dr. Graham at 5 Eastern on CNN. The Bushes are departing Washington. CNN's live. We will replay Bill Clinton's inaugural address, which ran about 14 minutes. This is the picture on the East Coast. On the West Coast at March Air Force Base in California, the first contingent of United States Marines arriving from Somalia, where their duty was rigorous dangerous, and humanitarian. Back to Washington, the president has stepped from his limousine. This is the first time he has done this. Mike Beschloss, Bill Moyers, we recall Jimmy Carter walking down Pennsylvania Avenue with First Lady Rosalind Carter. That was a long time ago, and this is the first time for this president to step out.
And also George Bush did it, oddly enough, although it isn't particularly well remembered. Carter did it in '77. The impact of that first scene of a president walking in his inaugural parade had a great deal more impact, perhaps, than the repeat of it has. But this is a president, President Clinton, who is perhaps more talented in the use of symbols to convey political messages than many political leaders the last half century. What he conveys with this walk is the sense of a leader in touch with the people. That's something he tried to do every one of those 12 months of that campaign. You can imagine he will be trying very hard to do the same thing through the next 4 years.
It puts him on, literally, geographically, a level with the people that redeems this week. I mean, I have to say that I thought USA Today's review this morning of the week's television activities was quite apt. It talked about Washington's becoming a theme park in which the celebrities from Hollywood had turned it into an extravaganza at which the people are spectators, not participants. This is a different level and a more powerful level of America's ritual symbolism.
And this is not impromptu at all. The Secret Service decided where along this parade route this president would get out of his limousine. And the shot is too tight for me to tell precisely where they are. But
for instance, you see that manhole cover, you can imagine that that is certainly welded shut for security reasons.
Okay, they're right by the Treasury building.
Near the White House now. Bernie, he's a very lucky politician. Lucky not only in the refusal of his adversaries in the Democratic Party to run, lucky in his name, William Jefferson Clinton, lucky in his appearance, he's very telegenic, and today he's so lucky on the weather. If John F. Kennedy had tried that in 1961, he'd have been slipping and sliding and freezing to death out there.
Okay, by the way, our producer, Alec Moran, tells me that he's by the Treasury. What he is, he's walking, they're walking on the east side of the Treasury building, and that's that short street, and there are fewer people on this street than are on the broad avenue of Pennsylvania that we saw him just come down, and of course this gives security people, especially the Secret Service, more control. The envelope around the president, they can better control. And CNN has learned that the Senate, Alec Moran, did I hear you correctly, that Les Aspin has been confirmed as Defense Secretary? Lloyd Benson, I'm sorry. Lloyd Benson has been confirmed as Treasury Secretary.
Not a bad thing to have happen at the moment. His president is passing the Treasury. We might also put another historical footnote, and that is that two of Bill Clinton's heroes, Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, walked to the inaugural ceremony. They did not walk back. The first time that was done was Jimmy Carter.
Janetta Cole, an anthropologist, she's also head president of Spelman College. As an anthropologist, she said, Bill Moyers, that symbols are very important.
They truly are. America is not a very, we don't have a lot of ceremonies in common. This is one of them. Unfortunately, some of our most memorable ceremonies have been funerals. The funeral of John F. Kennedy, the funeral of Abraham Lincoln, the funeral train winding its way mournfully back to Illinois. This is a celebratory. This and the Super Bowl are probably the most important American symbols.
For those of you familiar with Washington, the President and Mrs. Clinton, in effect, are walking north on this street. They'll be walking to the northeast end of the Treasury building, and of course then they will take a left and they'll be going west, in effect walking again on Pennsylvania Avenue right towards the White House and the reviewing stand. Michael.
You know, to pick up on Bill Moyers' excellent point, in 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated, people would hear about his inauguration to some extent through the radio, but mainly in newspapers. They would read the address, they might read some reportage. Now the way Americans experience this inauguration is mainly by television, and that is why in many ways you've seen that the events that were given the greatest amount of attention by the Clinton people this week were not so much the written documents that were disseminated or even the president's inaugural address, but the pictures, one after another. And I dare say that what people remember of this inaugural week will be the many scenes we've seen, the entertainment rally at the Lincoln Memorial, the visit to the Kennedy grave, the events of today.
There's another event of this day going on, even as Bill Clinton shields his eyes from the western sun. The United States Senate is in session on Capitol Hill. Bob Franken.
Well, Bernie, what we were told today is that the Senate wanted to get the session to symbolize that the government is getting back into business. The Senate is confirming ABC, as it was described today. The moment they're dealing with the confirmation of Defense Secretary-designate Aspen. There's also Treasury Secretary Benson, as we know, and Secretary of State designee Warren Christopher. More confirmations possible tomorrow. Then, of course, the business really begins. Congress will get back into session, not used to being a Congress of the same party as the president. I talked to one senator after the luncheon that was held up here, and he said it's going to be quite different. There's not going to be the confrontation. But then, and this was a Democratic senator, it was very interesting. He volunteered the comment, it will not be all sweetness and light. Remember that Bill Clinton, to a great extent, ran against Washington and oftentimes ran against the Congress, even a Democratic Congress. Now, it's one that he has to deal with, Bernie.
Well, I respect the anonymity of your source, but I'm so tempted to ask you, Bob Franken, who was that Democrat who said that, but I'll resist the temptation. Thanks very much. Bill Moyers, you were about to make a point before we went up to Bob.
Not a big point. You were talking about Lloyd Benson being confirmed even as they walked by the Treasury building as Secretary of the Treasury, and Les Aspin, we thought for a moment it might be Les Aspin. Maybe Les Aspin can't be found. If he's lucky, they won't find him, and he won't have to be sworn in today. Leave it to Dick Cheney.
Well, you know, I suspect Dick Cheney, who's been at home out at his Virginia house all this afternoon and all this morning, I bet Mr. Cheney was hoping, please let there be no reason for me to have to go into the Pentagon. They are just, I'll take a guess, less than 50 yards from the presidential reviewing stand.
But he's slowing down. Look at that. I mean, I think he wants to savor this moment as long as he can.
Indeed.
I wish I knew something about fashion. I mean, what about that hat, Michael? You're the historian among us.
Well, that hat looks circa 1971 or so. And you know, Bill, there's a theory that fashions are very much in league with the political trends of the times. In the 1980s, many of the fashions were very similar to those of the 1950s, a period that politically was quite similar to the 1980s. That raises the question, of course, whether the fashions of the early 1970s that we see here are perhaps a forerunner of a situation which the decade of the 1990s will be rather similar to the late 60s, early 70s, a period in which Bill Clinton began to be a political activist.
Well, I'm always so utterly impressed when women dress for their own personal comfort rather than dressing to appeal to other people. And in this two-piece suit, clearly Mrs. Clinton appears to be quite comfortable. Down there on the parade route, Deborah Potter.
Yes, Bernie, that struck me too. She did have on a top coat earlier in the day. When she got into her limousine, she took it off, and she's been walking ever since we turned the corner here, just before the corner at 15th and Pennsylvania, without a top coat and looking quite comfortable doing it, although she still has on her blue hat, which matched the coat. So not worrying about the fashion, obviously quite comfortable in her attire. President Clinton, needless to say, could not resist the temptation of getting out to show himself to the people, and he showed himself along the way to some of the unique features of this parade. We had the first lesbian and gay band performing along the sidelines of the parade, and the president gave them a thumbs up as he went by. Bernie?
What's the temperature down there on the street, Deborah? How does it feel?
And
I was just asking you, I don't know whether you heard me, I was asking, what's the temperature? How does it feel down there? Okay, apparently she can't hear me.
Bernie, it was so cold at Ulysses Grant's inauguration in 1873, the champagne froze. I mean,
I remember Ronald Reagan's second inaugural. His was the only one that had to be called off because of the cold weather.
That's right. This is southern weather. Washington becomes a southern town again, at least temporarily.
This is extraordinary. Usually, in terms of years going back, we remember John Kennedy's inaugural parade and how the Army in the early hours of the morning had to use blowtorches to melt the ice and the snow that was around the reviewing stand. It was extremely cold.
But you know, I read the other day that 34 of the inaugurations had been conducted in good weather. Clear skies. That having lived in Washington for 7 years, I don't remember that many nice Januaries, but I'm glad to know that historically this day has been kind. Of course, some of them took place, I forgot that, some of them took place in March. How long was it that we inaugurated presidents, Michael, on March 4th?
Until 1937. And you know, Bill, when the amendment was done to change inaugural day from March 4 to January 20th, one great worry was that you would make the day much less hospitable to inaugurations and therefore give presidents a less pleasant way of beginning their administration.
You know, I'm thinking about two people we've seen and heard on CNN many a time along this parade route, just a few blocks behind them on Pennsylvania Avenue with very good vantage points are former Tennessee Republican Senator Howard Baker and CNN's own Robert Novak. In their apartments along Pennsylvania Avenue, they have superb views of this parade route.
In fact, they owe that to some extent, Bernie, to John Kennedy, because when John Kennedy rode in his car down Pennsylvania, or down Constitution Avenue, and then down Pennsylvania to the White House in 1961, he was very dismayed by the fact that at street level on Constitution Avenue were stores that were shabby, souvenir stores that were not very picturesque in the way that, for instance, Paris ceremonial streets were. That led John and Jacqueline Kennedy to devote a great deal of time to the refurbishment of Constitution Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue, and the result of that, in a way, is what we're seeing today, a street that is far more ceremonial, much more grand, much more the kind of scene that a president should see while coming down Pennsylvania Avenue from the Capitol to the White House.
If you're wondering where are they as the president shields his eyes, that was the picture on the front side. This is the diplomatic entrance of the White House on the South Lawn. And that moving van has been there for several hours, and they have been scurrying in with the president's and Mrs. Clinton's personal effects and pieces of furniture. Back out on this side of the White House, Pennsylvania Avenue, Bill Moyer's lots of fluttering flags, and he's gone just a little west of the main side of the White House. He's moving more towards the northwest gate now.
Probably trying to avoid Novak's apartment. You know, if he could walk the streets for a week and keep Novak in that apartment, he'd already performed a great accomplishment. Keep him holed up. Don't let him out.
Actually, they're not too far from where the Clintons began, and that was at Blair House this morning. Mr. Clinton began his day with a briefing from President Bush's National Security Advisor, General Brent Scowcroft, and then, of course, they were off and running.
Michael, Bernie asked me about tradition. How, as a historian, do you think tradition is important? Is tradition important to American continuity, or do we live so much in the present that it no longer matters?
I think absolutely, Bill. And, you know, so much of it has to do with the way the public sees an incoming president. This is the first time that people see Bill Clinton as their president. In a way, it's the first time he has a chance to gain the loyalty and support in a grand way of the 57% of the American people who did not vote for him. Today is the day that he evolves from a partisan political leader into someone who is a head of state who nonetheless still has political aims. Reaching back to tradition, reaching back through the 200 years that have preceded this day, helps him to put himself in line with the 41 presidents that have gone before him. It puts him in a pantheon that is very different from that he was in yesterday.
Joining us right now on the north lawn of the White House is Linda Bloodworth-Thomason. Welcome to our coverage. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you, Bernie.
You have been with your friends, the Clintons, all day long. What's it been like?
Well, it's been a little overwhelming. It's been a joy this morning to watch along the parade route. I've never seen such ebullience. It's the feeling that people are getting their old dreams out of the closet and dusting them off and trying them on for size again, and they're yelling all kinds of encouragement and thumbs up all along the parade route. I've been to the Mardi Gras, but this does not compare.
This doesn't compare. You have given your friends lots of advice, and I'm curious, what have you told Bill Clinton about his appearance, his personal appearance, his hair, his suits, and also Hillary Clinton?
You know, I would never presume to give them advice about anything. Hillary and I have never really had a conversation about her appearance. I think she looks fabulous. We had some people on our television shows who I think have given her some counsel during the year, but you know, I think she and I are alike in that we're a lot more interested in where women are going and not what they'll have on when they get there.
Mm-hmm. And also what's in their minds.
Exactly.
You have the distinction of sleeping in a very historic bed in the White House. Tell us about how did that come about? What's it like?
Well, I haven't done that yet. I think we're going to do that tomorrow night, and I guess we'll kind of be proxy sleepers for anyone in America who has a fantasy of sleeping there. It's just something that Hillary knew I'd wanted to do since I was a little girl, so as soon as they were elected, he was elected president, she called and said, we want you to sleep in Lincoln's bed on Thursday night, so that's what we're going to do.
Okay, I should tell you, and I'll tell our viewers if you don't already know, the United States Senate has just confirmed Les Aspin of Wisconsin as this nation's new Secretary of Defense. It was a voice vote, and it was, guess what? That's Mr. Aspin, the new Defense Secretary, with his balding head to us right there in the center of the screen. This man is an expert on the military, on the Pentagon. He's no stranger. He's the former chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. He was one of Robert McNamara's whiz kids when Mr. McNamara was Secretary of Defense. Bill Moyers.
20 years ago, Bernie, I did a documentary called Mr. Aspin versus the Pentagon. He was a young congressman having just arrived here from Wisconsin, and he was taking on the Pentagon. He stayed around long enough to become the consummate insider. He is now running the institution he once took on as the dragon of American politics.
And he is smart, smart, smart. To the left of your screen, Secretary of State Warren Christopher. Robert Fernand, our executive producer, reminding me that Mr. Christopher is still Secretary of State designate because the Senate, which is working his will, has not confirmed him. They will very shortly. At this point, it's procedural. But we still have to put on the word designate. Ah, look at what's happening now. They're now on 17th Street. This is on the west side of the old ornate executive office building.
This is a very unusual man, and I think someday he might be president. It's funny, David and I never discussed that, but we both had the same thought.
David, what do you do now?
I'm a salesman in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Has the friendship remained?
Oh, stronger than ever. You know, it's the kind of friendship that you don't even have to be together or say anything. You just know he's there, and I'm there for him. And it's very special.
Carolyn, of course, he came to you the day after the election, right?
We were all together at my house. It was about 3 in the morning, and the Georgetown FOBs and the Hot Springs High School friends came to me and said, we think brunch at your house at 10 would be a great idea. Now, that was at 3 in the morning. And we didn't even invite Bill, but I think David maybe dropped the word that we might be getting together, and we looked up and we saw the motorcade coming, and that's just normal.
David, what, and this might be difficult, but what might be something about President Clinton you know we don't know? A personality fact, something that you know we don't know.
I tell you, I've waited for this day, Larry, for a year and 2 months. I still don't think the public knows Bill Clinton the way we do, certainly. We've talked till we're blue in the face all year, but somehow the word hadn't gotten out. Really, it's his heart. It's his love for people. It's his caring when he gets up in the morning about others, truly, more than he cares for himself. And he's working towards that. And that's the only way he's made it through this year.
In other words, you would use the word kindness.
Oh, empathy. No. Empathy.
Would that mean that nothing could be further from the truth than Slick Willie?
That stabs me through the heart. That's why I got involved this year and dedicated this whole year to him.
Carolyn, what's a quality you see in him that maybe the general public doesn't as yet?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. I don't think that the public knows how deeply spiritual he is as a man, because he's very private about that. But he is a deeply spiritual man and believes in going into his closet rather than the street corner, and I think that's refreshing. And I also think that the public needs to know he wraps his own Christmas presents.
All right, has he arrived yet?
I think we're waiting for him any moment now.
Ah, there's one thing, David. He's always late.
He is always late.
Was he late as a kid?
Gosh, I'm getting in bad trouble.
Always on time for school.
I told everybody his nicknames and all these other things. He's pretty much late. The other morning we jogged, Tuesday morning. I dressed, I thought, well, he'll be at least on time when I'm out in 20-degree weather, and he was at 20, 30, 40 minutes late. That's all right.
Have a good time, guys. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for having us on, Larry.
Sure. David Leopolis and Carolyn Staley, they go back a long way with the new President of the United States. Someone who doesn't go back quite that far, but had a lot to do with Bill Clinton being President of the United States, is James Carville, generally regarded as one of the best political strategists in America. We'll meet him next. Don't go away.
I was thinking about buying a Honda Accord, and then I saw the Oldsmobile Achieva beat the Honda Accord and Toyota Camry in a 100,000-mile test. I really believe the quality is there, and so does my husband, or we wouldn't have bought the Achieva. I've already given the 800 number to an acquaintance. If you're really thinking about getting a car, get the test results and look at the video.
For the complete results of this independent real-world test, call 1-800-THE-TEST. It's your call.
I'm Anna Barton.
Stephen Fleming never met a woman like Anna.
I've never had feelings like this.
And neither did his son.
This is Anna, my father. I've just asked Anna to marry me.
I don't trust her.
Are you sure she's really what you want?
With love comes risk.
Do you think I would have married Martin if I couldn't be with you?
With obsession comes damage. 2 thumbs up, way up. Damage, rated R. Starts Friday. Check newspapers for a theater near you.
We live in a world of illusions. You see something, you think it's real. Sometimes it is.
Sometimes it's not. Like counterfeit hair care products that look like Paul Mitchell or say they have the same formula, like the ones you might find in drugstores or supermarkets. Don't be fooled by their looks, because we can only guarantee they're Paul Mitchell if you get them in a salon.
Remember, what you see
isn't always what you get.
For a Paul Mitchell signature salon, call this number.
I'll never go back to denture pastes or powders again.
Here's why. C-Bond Denture Adhesive. 2 powerful adhesives in a soft, micro-thin seal bonds dentures to your gums. Can hold comfortably all day.
You'll never go back to pastes or powders again.
C-Bond.
They are a generation that came of age during the hard and bitter times of the 60s. Now, as the first baby boomer president takes office, how will the influence of his past affect the governing style of America's future? CNN presents Passing the Torch, 9 Eastern, Sunday.
We're back on Larry King Live, and we now go to the White House, for this was a new day for a lot of people. He is the official, the White House correspondent for CNN. He is Wolf Blitzer. You like this job?
Well, I've had it now for a few hours. It's a pretty good job. I can't complain, Larry. It's been fun covering Clinton in Little Rock since November 1st or so. I went down there just before the election, and I basically spent the last 2.5 months watching him make this transition from small state governor to big-time president.
Now, anybody who watched the inauguration today and the ceremony saw you. How did you get that seat? That didn't look like the press section.
It was with all the VIPs, but what the Radio TV Press Gallery, Radio TV Correspondents Association at Capitol Hill, what they do is they have a lottery for 4 seats. 1 to ABC, 1 to NBC, CBS, and 1 to CNN, and we have to draw straws to see who gets what seat. And so I was in one of those seats, and Katie Couric from NBC was in another, Bob Schieffer from CBS, and Britt Hume from ABC. And the one that I happened to have gotten was sort of behind Clinton, about 30 or 40 feet.
I know you've had a long, tough day, Wolf. A couple of things. One, Clinton and the media. How will that work, do you think?
there will be some initial problems. The transition was relatively smooth, but now the transition people, George Stephanopoulos and Dee Dee Myers, who worked very effectively for Clinton during the campaign, they have to step in and run the media operation for the White House. So there will be some problems already. Even on this first day, Larry, there was some tension between the Clinton press office and the news media here, because for the first time in a long time, they blocked our access to what was Marlin Fitzwater's office and previous press secretary's office, and they put a guard out in front and they said, we can't get there. They're going to determine in the next few days whether we will be able to walk in and out of the press secretary's office freely. I will make one other point, that at least with 3 journalists in Washington, Clinton got off on the wrong foot when he suggested the other day that he was going to be rooting for the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl, because those of us from Buffalo are not going to be all that happy to hear that he's going to be cheering for the Cowboys.
And he appears to have an immediate domestic problem in the question of the approval of Miss Baird, right?
He has a big problem with Zoe Baird, and certainly, you know, whenever there are these cabinet appointments during a transition, if you go back during most of the administrations, usually there were 1 or 2 nominees who did face some serious problems getting confirmed. I think Zoe Baird, barring some unforeseen disclosure, if, for example, her story that she told the committee these past few days, if there are some flaws in that story, she could be in deep trouble. But barring that, most of us seem to think she still will get confirmed despite all of the uproar.
Do you think, Wolf, having come to know them in Little Rock, that if they had to do it all over again, they would have appointed someone else?
Well, you know, that Zoe Baird did come clean during the interview process, the pre-announcement. She did say that she did have this problem. She did have these 2 illegal aliens basically working for her, and they knew about it. Clinton, in fact, knew about it, but they decided that they were going to go ahead and make that announcement and see if it would be a big issue, which of course it has turned out to be a rather big issue.
Wolf, you frame nicely in the picture. We're going to be seeing lots of you. Thanks as always.
Thank you, Larry.
Wherever he is, we are. Wolf Blitzer, like we're mated. Wolf Blitzer at the White House. This is Larry King live in Washington. We'll go back in a moment to the Arkansas Ball and talk to strategist James Carville. Don't go away.
Grand Central got 1,037,500 copies. The Penny Bowes copier is still working. How's that look?
Identical. I have an audition this afternoon.
Copies in my resume.
Need a couple more copies. My music.
A lot of people coming up making free copies, and the machine's been purring like a kid.
The flyer for my rap band, Too Slim to Be Large.
What are you doing now?
Always need lots of copies of the resume.
Just kick the thing. And the Penny Bowes 9070 has got 1,051,088 copies after copy after copy.
In the early 90s, the real estate business changed.
I've got your financing seminar, 2 closings, and a showing.
Busy day.
Busy morning.
Professionals took control, trained to use the latest marketing tools, responsive to the real human issues.
He's not moving, but we've got a meeting set for tomorrow.
And one organization is setting the pace. Better Homes and Gardens Real Estate. Join us. Call 1-800-ADVANCE.
As a truck company for 90 years, we understand the value of a strong frame. A reassuring strength for towing, whether you're on road or off road. GMC Truck, the strength of experience.
Ricola, the all-natural herb cough drop imported from Switzerland. Ricola has been soothing throats and relieving coughs naturally for over 60 years.
When the pressure's really coming down, why worry about printing? Just call Sir Speedy. From design and typesetting to color printing and binding, Sir Speedy will handle it, and things will start looking up. Sir Speedy, the business printers, the right impression every time.
Welcome back to Larry King Live, and back we go to the Arkansas Ball, which is at the biggest ball. It's at the Washington Convention Center, and with us are James Carville, the famed Clinton campaign strategist. He's on your right, and on your left, Mandy Grunwald, the Clinton campaign advisor and media strategist. Two very happy people tonight. Mandy, how happy?
Oh, very happy. It's not every day you get to go to a party to elect a candidate for president. Feels pretty good.
During the campaign, Mandy, did you ever fantasize this happening? Did you ever think, what would the ball be like, and I'll be there?
You know, we never let ourselves think like this. We occasionally let ourselves imagine election night, but I don't think we ever got to this. This is beyond our imagination.
Now, James, the first thing you have to do is explain to the public all over the world why you are dressed the way you are, since you have never dressed that way in your life.
I'm just trying to be presidential here, Larry.
Do you feel funny, Jim? Because that's not your outfit.
No, I do. I'm a little out of character here tonight, but I feel so good inside. What difference it makes what I have on the outside? It's a happy night for me. It's a happy night for Mandy, but I think it's a happy night for the country, and that's the important thing.
How, Jim, in your opinion, did the inaugural, the whole festivity go today?
I just thought it was spectacular. You know, I stayed back and watched it on television because I wanted to see how the American public were viewing it. And I thought the president gave a great speech. People had a good time. I went out, I ran on the mall this afternoon, and everybody was coming up to me telling me about how good they felt. And, you know, I think President Clinton's off to a good start, and I just hope we can continue the momentum here and get to make some changes.
Now, Mandy, you told us neither of you are going to work in the administration, right? By your own desires, you want to stay in private life. Mandy, as you look back, you advised him in the media. It was you that had the idea to go and play the clarinet, go on MTV, play the saxophone, rather, go on MTV, go on Arsenio Hall. Will he continue, in your opinion, to be a media president?
I think, not in the sense you think, Larry, but I think Bill Clinton understands that he's got to talk to people and explain his policies to build support for change. And if that means you call him a media president, he will be. I think of it as the job of being president, the job of governing. They used to call Ronald Reagan the great communicator. Even we Democrats did. And we used to say it with an insult. I think it's a job description for the 1990s.
Jimmy, James, if you were strategizing the presidency, would you tell him to continue to make frequent public appearances?
Absolutely. I would say, you know, Larry King, it's a good place to go. People are there. But the big thing is not what shows you go on, but to bring about change. And I think that's what Bill Clinton wants to do. And I think that's what he's going to do. And I think when his program comes out, people are going to see that it's something different. This is a different campaign, and I believe this is going to be a different administration, and that's the important thing.
Was it, in your opinion, Mandy, a troubled transformation? He took a lot of raps, especially in the last week.
No, I don't think anything matters till the moment today when he put his hand on the Bible and said he was going to be the next president. You guys will forget it. I don't think the American people cared much. And I think what really matters is what James is talking about. People are ready for change. They want it. He talked today about bold, persistent experimentation. I think that's what we're going to see, and I think that's what matters.
Has he arrived, James, at the ball yet?
Has he arrived? If he has, I don't think so. I don't have the best view, but I suspect that he'll be here before long, though. I know everybody's anticipating a lot of people
here. He'll probably be here before long and stay long.
Yeah. How often during the campaign did you have to say, he'll be here before long? If we have one trait, he is constantly late, is he not?
Well, he's constantly brilliant and he's constantly courageous, and I guess American people can take the fact that he runs a little bit behind schedule if he has those two traits, and what the heck.
If that and junk food are his only weaknesses, we're in for a great 4 years.
All right, keep those earphones pinned because, you know, it's hard to hear. We're going to try some phone calls for Mandy Grunwald and James Carville, and we go to Toronto, Canada. Hello.
Hi, Jim.
Well, you beat my brave, so but I'm going to forgive you for that and answer your question.
Okay, big question I've got. First of all, Clinton's starting to break promises coming out of the water. Middle income tax break gone. Haitians go home. Deficit reduction. Pension to possibly to 67. Cap on company deductions for medical care. 50 cent a gallon gas tax. Allowing homosexuals in the Army. He's questioning about that. What have we got after today now that he's president, Jim?
Well, did I get a speech or a question? I think that you're going to see. Here he comes into the room now.
Larry, you may want to go to
I know better than compete with Bill Clinton.
Okay, if our cameras pick him up, we'll pick him up, but you can go ahead and answer the question, James.
I think that the president is going to change. It's going to bring about change in the economy, and it's going to do something about health care costs. And he hadn't even had the first day of his administration. Let's give him 4 years, and then let's see what his record is then.
Okay, there's Bill and Hillary, and I would imagine this is their first ball of the night. Is it, James and Mandy? Do you understand that?
I think this is their first stop. It's obviously where their hearts are. And I think they're here to have some fun.
Now, can you, James, be a reporter here for a minute? Where are you and where are they?
Well, I'm up on the stand, and I see the president and Mrs. Clinton on the stage right now. Mrs. Clinton has a beautiful lavender dress on. The president in traditional American tux walking before an adoring crowd here at the Washington Convention Center. It's the Arkansas Ball. There's real sort of enthusiasm here.
Excellent, James. James, excellent. Mandy, pick it up. What do you see from your vantage point?
Seeing about the same thing. I think Bill Clinton's about to address the crowd.
And I think if he is, we'll pick it up.
There he is.
And he is. Clinton's first inaugural ball.
Wow. Look at this sea of people. Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a lot of things I want to say, but first of all, let me be really serious. Does Hillary look great tonight or what? I think, you know, we have to visit 11 balls tonight, but we wanted to come here, and we both would like to say just a couple of things to somehow try to convey to you our gratitude, and I'm going to pull my new prerogative and let Hillary go first.
Well, I know that there are more people in this great hall than Bill and I can even see. And I know that most of you are our friends from Arkansas, and some of you are honorary Arkansans. But all of you are people for whom we are very grateful for your help, your friendship, your love, your prayers, your constancy through thick and thin over all of these long months. And I hope that you felt as we did when today at noon your governor became our president, how proud we were. And we just want all of you to know that we expect you to stay in touch with us. We expect you to visit us. We expect to go back to Arkansas and visit you, and we expect to be part of the future together. Thank you all very, very much.
I also want to acknowledge, I don't know if they have yet been acknowledged, but my mother and her husband Dick and Hillary's mother and her brothers and our families are over there to my left and your right, and I'm really glad they're here. They had a lot to do with this election. I'm sure that all of you know that in a larger sense, you have been our family for
a very long time now. And I hope you are really, really, really proud to be from Arkansas today at noon. And more importantly, I hope that for the rest of your lives, you'll always be proud you were here today at the beginning of something really important for our country. The other thing I want to say to you is I can see how tightly you're all packed in here, and I don't know if anybody can dance or even hear back by the exit sign. This is the biggest of our balls. But I do want to say this. I hope that all of you will stay up here very late and not leave, because I want you to know, when we knew just how many people from home were coming, we did a lot of work to make sure this ball would have the best, the most consistent, and the longest string of entertainment of any of the balls. So, I want you to stay here, have a delightful time, hug one another, laugh, and be proud, and wake up tomorrow determined to make something good happen in this country. I love you, and I thank you. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here tonight, and I'll never forget that. Thank you, and God bless you all.
That's the scene at the Arkansas Ball, Bill Clinton's first appearance. There'll be 10 or 11 more. We thank James Carville and Mandy Grunwald for serving as reporters for us tonight. It was nice to see Bill Clinton's mother. I remember her calling into this program when the president was on from Ocala, Florida. She was calling him from Las Vegas. Time marches on. The Clintons' first dance as president and first lady. We'll come back, and when we do, the famed artist Peter Max will be with us. Peter was chosen to do the inaugural paintings, and he's done an incredible array of 3 types. We're going to show them and talk with him as well. And as we leave in this break, there you see Mr. and Mrs. President and Mrs. Clinton's first dance as President and First Lady at the Arkansas Ball. This is Larry King live in Washington. How are we doing so far?
In 1987, he said Congress was soft on the Sandinistas. In 1991, he said the president had abandoned his party. In 1992, he tried to upset the political system. On February 1st, he's back on CNN.
Gentlemen, he is not a happy man. This Mercury Villager is outselling our minivan, and as his top design team, we have to do something about it. He wants a minivan with a sliding rear seat and standard anti-lock brakes. He wants a minivan that is fully equipped, comfortable, and drives like a Mercury.
Why doesn't he just get a Villager?
The new front-wheel drive Mercury Villager. All this and the quality of a Mercury.
Bell room.
Some people get nasal congestion, but if you get sinus congestion, use a sinus spray like Sinex. Only Sinex has a decongestant plus Vicks Vapors, so you can feel your swollen passages open up. For sinus, think Sinex.
My name is Gianna Jessam, and I almost wasn't born. I was aborted. You see, my mother chose to abort me when she was 7 months pregnant. But by some miracle, I survived. I weighed less than 3 pounds and was raised in an incubator. And I've had many difficult operations. Now, I know there's a lot of talk about choice these days, but for me, the most beautiful choice is life.
Tonight on Sports Tonight, yet another fine mess Charles Barkley's gotten himself into. We'll hear how much it's going to cost him this time. Also, we'll talk about the tragedy at the University of Iowa where one of the star players has been killed in a car crash. Nick Charles and I at 11.
You're watching Larry King Live. This is the Arkansas Ball. We'll be back in a moment with James Carville and Mandy Grunwald. The President and the First Lady have danced their first dance. As President and First Lady, they're on stage. He's introducing the rest of the members of his family. This is the largest ball, 12,000 people in attendance at the Washington Convention Center. We'll come back, talk some more with Mandy and James, and then meet the noted artist, Peter Max, the creator of some bold works of art and commissioned by the Clinton Inaugural Ball Committee to produce the commemorative poster of this historic inaugural. We'll all be right back. Don't go away.
Coming up, a one-hour special looks at the highlights and celebration, the inauguration, in 30 minutes, here on CNN.
Here at America's Fitness Warehouse, we have one basic principle. That is, if we have to match someone else's price, then we were priced too high to begin with. That's why at America's Fitness Warehouse, we set the prices so low that we're the deal to beat. We have the largest selection of workout equipment in town, such as the Schwinn Airdyne or a bench or gym from Bodysmith by Parabody, the #1 bench manufacturer in the USA. So bring the family on down to America's Fitness Warehouse, where America shops for fitness. You'll be glad you did. I'm Ron Krett, and you have my word on it.
Will the car that is first in owner loyalty please rise? I see. Now, the car with the best resale value, would you rise? Oh. Well, I understand there's a car here from Ohio that has outsold every other car for 4 straight model years. May we see you, please?
The Honda Accord, the best value on the road today, and it's on sale. A great deal is happening right now at your Central Ohio Honda dealers.
This is CNN.
In a couple of minutes, we'll meet Peter Max and look at some of his extraordinary drawings of this inaugural. But let's go back to our ace reporters at the Arkansas Inaugural Ball. Mandy Grunwald, who was Clinton campaign advisor for media, and James Carville, the Clinton campaign strategist. We're already getting calls with offers, Mandy, as to whether the two of you want to go on the road as a reporting team.
I think it could be dangerous, and we'll stick to what we know.
Did you enjoy doing that, James?
I loved it. You know, Larry, one time I want you and I to go out and call a couple of 3 innings of a single-A, a double-A baseball game. That's my lifetime ambition.
That would be heaven.
To be a play-by-play man at a minor league baseball team.
By the way, James, on a social note, when are you getting married?
Well, I don't know. You know, Mary, she went down to Houston with the president, with former President Bush today. So I had talked to her since this morning, but we're looking forward to writing a book, and we're having a good time together right now.
She did not attend the inaugural then, right?
No, she did not attend an inaugural, but she came and come to a couple of non-inaugural events with me. We had a party Sunday night. She came to the National Press Club, and I'm real proud of her. I'm real proud of the job that she's done in the campaign, and I'm real proud of the fact that President Bush has been so kind to her and invited her down to Houston, and she thinks very highly of him, and they're very close to each other. And I was thinking about it today during the inauguration. I'm glad that we won, but I'm not glad that she lost.
That's real nice. Mandy, I think of all the times we've seen Bill Clinton in so many areas and up close, personal, with him, I don't think I've ever seen him as happy as he looked tonight on that stage.
And I think you've got some breaking news. I didn't think you knew he could dance.
Is that the first time we've seen him dance?
I don't think you've seen him dance, and I think Hillary is a hell of a dancer, too. I
Yeah.
think this is good news for the White House.
We have seen Ross Perot dance. We've
Yes.
certainly seen President Bush dance. Another first.
Another first for Larry King. There you go.
Are you guys going to take his advice and stay there late?
I don't know.
I think we're ready to have a good time, Larry.
James, you both did a great job this year, James and Mandy. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for being reporters for us.
Well, Larry, you did a pretty fair country job yourself, and thank you for having us.
Thanks very much. Mandy Grunwald and James Carville. And when we come back, we'll meet an old friend, a fellow Brooklynite, an extraordinary worldwide known artist, Peter Max. And we'll show you some great, great stuff. Don't go away.
business trip was in the middle of nowhere.
The most unusual place. Every day, 2 million travelers set out to do business.
Last year I traveled 65 days.
94 days.
Who would know better what they need than Holiday Inn?
I always rehearse my presentation in front of the bedroom mirror.
In front of the bathroom mirror.
We make them feel welcome in so many ways. Maybe that's why more business travelers stay with us than anyone else.
What I miss most is my children.
Holiday Inn. Stay with someone you know who really knows you.
If she had a fever, you wouldn't wait a week to see the doctor. If she were hungry, you wouldn't wait a few days to feed her. So why wait even a day to fix the brakes on the car you drive her around in? At Midas, we don't just fix your brakes right. We can fix them right the very same day you bring in your car. Think about it. Midas, because your brakes can't wait.
The more you take away from this Chevy Cavalier VL, the more it resembles the Honda Civic DX. Take away Cavalier's anti-lock brakes, base coat clear coat paint. Take away its two-sided galvanized steel, automatic door locks, Scotchgard treated seats, and toll-free 24-hour roadside assistance. But there's at least one thing you'd have to add. $1,500. The Chevy Cavalier. What else would you expect from the heartbeat of America? Still going strong at 70 plus or even 90 plus. What's their secret? Is there a formula for long life? The Art of Aging Gracefully, Thursday on Sonia Live, 1 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN.
And showing my age, I said, good Lord, it's Benny King here to sing the song. I loved it. So here he is. Give him a hand.
As we come back, that's Bill Clinton introducing Benny King. They gave Bill a saxophone at the Arkansas Ball tonight. And we welcome they're presenting him with this saxophone now. In fact, Peter Max, our next guest, is wearing a saxophone pin. This is going to be a 4-year saxophone event. And we may, I think he's going to play. Peter Max is with us here in studio. But let's see if the president plays saxophone. Then we could be Arsenio too. Peter, behind you is what? What are we seeing here?
You're seeing 24 of the 100 portraits I've done. I decided 35 days ago to do 100 portraits. And
that was your decision. They commissioned you.
They commissioned me to do all kinds of other things, and in order to do the posters and T-shirts and all the stuff, I started doing portraits.
Let's listen to President Bill Clinton tear it up. There you have it. Bill Clinton plays saxophone on television again. He does it on inaugural night. He does it at the Arkansas Ball with the brilliant Ben E. King and a group. And Hillary and Bill's mother jumping along the side. We're happy to be able to bring it to you. And earlier you heard his first remarks and the first dance. We've also heard from old friends and Wolf Blitzer and Miss Grunwald and Mr. Carville. And now Peter Max returns. Peter, you were commissioned to do what?
Yes, well, first it started with David Pry is an old friend of mine, David and Barbara Pry, former governor, senator of Arkansas, asked me, said, our man is now in the office, why don't you do something for the inauguration? And so I started to do one poster, and then they went to 3 posters, and then I did T-shirts of them, and as I was making the posters, I was creating portraits. And I thought as something special for Bill Clinton, I decided to do 100 portraits, kind of for the man who's bringing us into the next millennium, 100 portraits.
So, and how many are here?
You've got 24 here, and they're just the balance. If you took, there would be about 4 times as many portraits.
And where are they going to eventually
go? He saw them yesterday, and I heard he flipped out over them. He really loved them. And I was going to meet him yesterday, but the traffic jams got me to the Capitol much too late.
Where will they hang?
They're going to tour the United States in different museum shows. And so there's many museums that want these portraits already, and they're going to tour with a retrospective of all the other things I've done for him. And
you worked for a lot of presidents. You worked for, you know, no party, right? Mr. Reagan, Mr. Bush.
That's correct. I really feel aligned with Bill Clinton because he's kind of the rock and roll president. He's from my generation.
The 60s, that's right.
That's right, and it's really fantastic to have a president like this. And
okay, we're going to see some of the posters, too. That, of course, are the paintings that are behind Peter now as we talk with you. We're going to show you some of the posters. How many were created? 3 different ones?
I created 3 posters. They printed 30,000 posters. Then they printed another 35,000 T-shirts and 800,000 miniature posters, sort of like handbills. And then I created this tremendous stage for the Arkansas blue denim, blue jean ball, the blue jean bash. The band was playing and Bob Dylan was playing as well. I did the background for that.
Is pop art back?
Yes.
It is? Because of Clinton?
I think art's back. He is the president for the creative America. You know, America, the creativity in America is the one thing that no other country can copy. We are the most creative country in the world, and he's a very creative president, bringing out the creativity in us.
We're going to take a break, come back, show you the posters, show you some of the T-shirts as we enter into the era of Bill Clinton. Peter Max is our guest, called the Sultan of the 60s. Don't go away.
Hi. Was it something I said?
Just a business trip. I came over last night. I had company.
You mean my brother? He just loves my coffee.
Your brother?
Savor the sophisticated taste of Taster's Choice.
Hi.
Don't tell me you forgot to pack your Taster's Choice.
Listen, I'm going to be in Paris.
How romantic.
Well, it can be.
Madison, you should have seen me at this meeting. I was cool, I was confident, I had everything they wanted before they could ask for it. Research, no problem. The analysis, the projections, never looked better. Madison, oh, you should have been there.
Cambridge Businesswear keeps you organized, together, and always looking your best in business.
You and me, kid, we're going places, huh?
Cambridge Businesswear, as important to the way you look as the clothes you wear.
When Ford refined the full-size car, we made its shape more aerodynamic, its V8 engine more powerful, and yet more efficient. We also added to its comfort and even its safety with available anti-lock brakes and dual airbags. But through it all, one thing about the Ford Crown Victoria has remained the same. It's still as quiet as a Rolls-Royce.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
Ricola,
the all-natural herb cough drop imported from Switzerland. Ricola has been soothing throats and relieving coughs naturally for over 60 years.
They conned the boss into another trip. Nick and Fred are in L.A., home to Super Bowl 27, with interviews with the players and the people making Super Bowl 27. Sports tonight, every night next week at 11 Eastern, only on CNN.
We're back on Larry King Live with the famed artist Peter Max, commissioned to do 3 posters. We're going to show them to you now. And we'll start with the one that Peter chose to do of the Capitol.
This was the swearing-in one for the 20th. And
was that an actual portrait of the Capitol against your paint?
It's a portrait and, you know, painted. And it's one of 3 different posters I've done. And the other one coming up is that's the first one. That's for the 17th. It has all the inaugural ceremonies that started on the 17th. And when I did that poster, and this one here, I started to do the portraits. And then when they found out I wanted to do the portrait, they got very excited. And I heard from everybody at the committee and out of Washington that I'm one of Bill Clinton's favorite artists, and I just went wild. And I spent 35 days, day and night, making these things. I let everything go. I have a big book coming out by Donovan Publishing. I had to put that aside. I had to put this aside. And it just got totally involved in these amazing portraits. And now...
How did you do that?
Well, it's a combination of art, silkscreen, painting, acrylics on canvas, and I did different colorways. The reason I wanted to do them in so many different colorways, kind of depicting the present of the new age, the electronic age. You know, the Clinton in many different ways. Clinton in China, Clinton on Mars, Clinton on the moon, Clinton around the world, all the different kinds of Clintons. And these are all the possibilities that are going to happen with Bill Clinton this next 4 years.
Where do you get your colors?
They just come. They come from the work itself. I just work, and they're there. The combinations come.
Now we even have a T-shirt we're going to show you before Peter leaves us. These are being, I guess these are being sold everywhere, huh?
These were all over Washington. It was a fantastic success yesterday. They sent 35,000 T-shirts. We had them made, and we could have had 100,000 T-shirts. It wouldn't have been enough. So it was a very big success.
Now you can get back to doing something normal?
Normal again, starting tomorrow, after I get one good night's sleep.
Now, how does this work? I mean, this is your trademark, so you make money off the shirts?
I've given most of the money back to the inaugural committee so they can defray some of the costs. Everything we're doing, most of the money is going back towards the Clinton project.
You're amazing, Peter, as always. Thank you for stopping by. Peter Max, and when we come back, a surprise drop-in. In fact, we'll go there right now to back to the Arkansas Ball, where I think we're joined by Harry Thomason and Linda Bloodworth. You know them of television fame. Are they there?
Larry, hi.
Hey, Harry, how are you?
It's a little noisy. We're having a little trouble hearing, but we're here.
I hear you fine. Linda, how are you?
How are you, Larry?
Last time we spoke, you called into this show.
Yes, I did. Bill Clinton calls me a radio and television terrorist. A few times in the campaign I called in when I felt things were being reflected inaccurately, but I didn't do it that often.
What are your feelings tonight, Harry?
I think it's a culmination of that day in October last year when Bill announced that he was going to run for president, and Linda had the foresight to call the Hay Adams Hotel in Washington and make our reservations for the inaugural, and we might not have had rooms.
That far ahead, Linda?
Can hear him.
That far ahead?
Yeah. That far ahead. You know, we had the advantage of being from Arkansas and of knowing the kind of person that Bill Clinton is. And I think we were just 2 people amongst hundreds who had that feeling, but I think most of us were from Arkansas at that time.
You're experts in certainly television. You've had great success with television. How well does Clinton use it, Linda?
Well, I think he uses it very well, and one thing that we felt was important during the campaign, and I think Bill and Hillary both agreed, I should say the President and First Lady both agreed, was that the forum does not diminish the power or the eloquence of a message, and that it didn't matter if he said his message on Arsenio Hall or McNeil Lair. It was the message that counted, and he believed that, and I think that has proven to be a wise decision for him.
We've been commenting, Harry, about how terrific he looks tonight. You know, in all that we've seen him through in these past many months, I don't think I've ever seen him look happier than he looked tonight.
I think it's been that way all day long. In fact, ever since he arrived at the Lincoln Memorial for the opening ceremonies, he seems to be a man that feels at ease with the job he has to do.
Linda, you going to do another show around the White House?
No, I think we're going to be glad to get our lives back to normal. We'll probably see Bill and Hillary more often in Arkansas than in Washington.
Okay. We're going to get a call in for you guys, and then we're going to have a special tribute to someone before we sign off. Let's go to Kansas City, and I hope they can hear. Hello.
Yes. I'm Bill Bell from Kansas City.
Hi, Bill.
Yes, how are you?
Hi.
I just want to ask a question.
Go ahead.
We're spending, and I say we're spending this $32 million for this party. And his big deal is that he wants to cut the deficit.
Okay, how much money was spent on this party tonight, Linda, and how was it raised? Or Harry, either one?
Well, I would like to take that one. First of all, I think he's a little high on the budget, that it's been in line with what other inaugurations have cost in the past, and it's in the high 20s. But what we've done, and what people don't understand, that the taxpayers only pay for security around the president and the vice president, and that the income you make off of this offsets all the other debt. And this year, we've been fortunate, we've planned well, we've had good artists to come in and help us. We've made an excessive amount of money, we think, and we will be, and what we're not only planning to pay back everything the inauguration cost, but we're also going to try to pay the government for all security costs. And so this will, in fact, be the cheapest inauguration ever. And we're real proud of that, and that's exactly what we started out to do.
Thanks very much, Linda. Much continued success. You too, Harry. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Harry Thomason and Linda Bloodworth. And we certainly thank Peter Max. And when we come back, a special tribute to a special lady. Don't go away.
Versatile Ricoh touchscreen copier. For those impressed by its remarkable brain, consider the body. Precision engineered for heavy duty and high volume. Ricoh's obsession with reliability and performance in a whole new class of machine. And the quality we put into it, you can get out of it right now. Because Ricoh's touchscreen copiers are not only more productive, they're also more affordable. The name to know, Ricoh.
As a truck company for 90 years, we understand the value of a strong frame. A reassuring strength for towing, whether you're on road or off road. GMC Truck, the strength of experience.
To get rid of her gray, my wife can spend 40 minutes. But I discovered the 5-minute hair coloring.
The revolutionary discovery called Just for Men, from the leader in men's hair coloring. Simply apply Just for Men, and in 5 minutes, shampoo out.
Gray is blended away. The look of my natural color is back in 5 minutes. That was me, and it won't fade or wash out.
My hair takes forever, but you look great in just 5 minutes.
The look of your natural color in just 5 minutes. With Just for Men.
The only award show where the big names in both movies and TV take home the gold. Live, the 50th Annual Golden Globe Awards. 10 Eastern, Saturday night only on TBS.
A bright light went out tonight. Audrey Hepburn, the brilliant actress, died of cancer in Switzerland. She was only 63. Audrey had been a guest on this show a few times. We also did a special for TNT in 1991. We were in Amsterdam, and I asked her about a part she turned down. Anne Frank.
I'm not much of an actress, so to speak. I just have to deal with my own feelings and instinctively, and I've had great directors and partners. But it's definitely something that you can act something when it's here, and then you try and step into that part, you try to imagine a situation. Whereas Anne Frank was here. It was, in a way, it was me. And I could not have suffered through that again without destroying myself.
What did you mean when you say you're not an actor?
I feel I never have been. First of all, it just happened. I never trained or meant to become an actress. I needed to work. I wanted to be a dancer because that was the one thing that sort of occurred to me at the time.
Audrey Hepburn, we will miss her. Stay tuned for a Susan Rook live inaugural special. For the whole gang here at CNN in Washington, everybody in Atlanta, New York, our bureaus around the world, thanks for joining us in our continual inaugural coverage. This is Larry King. Good night.
Coming up, a one-hour special looks at the highlights and celebration, the inauguration, next on CNN.
A simple comparison between the Ford Taurus and the Honda Accord. With a 3-liter V6, the Ford Taurus has a lot to offer under the hood. With an Accord, you'll have to drop some power. The Taurus can hold 6 passengers comfortably. With the Accord, you'll have to drop a passenger. And since its introduction in 1986, there's been a Taurus on every car and driver top 10 list. Accord has been dropped from the list.
For an American-made American car, see the Ford Taurus at your Central Ohio Ford dealer.
Riblets from Applebee's. Once you've tasted them, you can't stop thinking about them. Tender, juicy little rib tips. Everywhere you look, you see them. Riblets. And more riblets. Hickory smoked, slow cooked. You got riblets on the brain.